Chapter 61. Dispute and Compromise. As quasi-prime minister, Lord John Arryn of the Vale has been very busy recently. There are many things to consider before and after the coronation of a new king, involving noble classes of all sizes. The reconstruction of the Red Fort is also an issue that must be taken seriously. Rebuilding is easy to say, but in reality there are many factors to consider. Basic equipment such as masonry and building materials must be stocked as early as possible, to what extent it needs to be rebuilt, whether all buildings need to be demolished, and whether they need to be redesigned, etc. Manpower needs to be rearranged at various levels to maintain the country's operations. There are currently only 2 King's Guards left out of a full strength of 7, and the seats in the Royal Council where the kingdom's government affairs are discussed and decided are not even filled yet. Not long after the war ended, everything was in ruins. Then John Arryn also needs to consider the mood of the would-be king. The death of his fiancée dealt a huge blow to Robert. Although through constant persuasion, Robert no longer had the thought of never marrying for the rest of his life, and gradually no longer rejected marriage with the West, but he could not be called honest. For example, he recently started to indulge in drinking and visiting brothels. Originally, this was enough to upset old John, but for some reason, news of incest between the Lannister family and his brother came out in the city. This kind of thing would only make him sigh with emotion at most, but it was different for Lannister. It took a lot of effort to persuade the would-be king to accept the marriage, but now that something like this happened, he really had the urge to blame the sky and scold his mother. So facing the black-haired young man who came over excitedly after hearing the news, he replied with suppressed anger, "I will arrange for the nuns to check whether Duke Tywin's daughter still retains her virginity before getting engaged, but noble children have been learning to ride horses since they were young. Some areas may be affected, so this is not proof of her virginity." Sunlight streamed in from the round window behind him, shrouding the lonely old man in the Imperial Conference Hall. At this time, he was sitting on the Prime Minister's chair, holding a quill and preparing to sign a document. He didn't speak when he spoke. "Stand up. It stands to reason that he shouldn't be so negligent to a king, but who knows that the person in front of him is his adopted son? At the same time, the other party has not been truly crowned, so he does not have so much etiquette to consider." Robert didn't care at all, but he was obviously dissatisfied with the meaning of the other person's words, so he pulled out the chair next to him and sat on it, while saying with disgust, "Then there is no need to check, do I have to marry that Cersei? Heck, women from all over the 7 kingdoms who want to marry the king can line up from the Great Wall to Flea Bottom in King's Landing." The old man who listened to such willful words unconsciously clenched the quill in his hand, and all the irritations he had suppressed for a long time seemed to come to his head at once, so he replied in a mean tone, "I want to remind you, Robert, that we and the Lannister marriage was never about finding you a satisfactory wife, so even if this is true, you have to marry her. So the majestic king can only marry a bitch wife who had incest with his brother and had an abortion? And then let everyone in the 7 kingdoms laugh at me." The black-haired young man laughed loudly after hearing this. "What do you think I am? A coward who swallows his anger? Gods, please save me. If I end up winning the battle and become a coward, then I might as well just run away and give myself to the Mad King. I treat you like a king." The old man interrupted the other party sternly, "A king who can bring good luck to this country and end the tyranny of the Mad King. I never wanted to be a king, don't you know? I just... If you don't want to, you can turn around and leave now." The bald old man with a hooked nose raised his voice and said, "After that, I will go to Dragonstone to welcome back Queen Leela and Prince Viserys, and then according to tradition, I will support Prince Viserys as the new king." These words made Robert's face turn red instantly. He leaned over the table with both hands and glared at the other person. He gritted his teeth and said, "Don't even think about doing that. John," I said, "I will kill all the Targaryens with my own hands. Listen to me, it's all of them. I want them to die like dragons." The man in front of him was very angry, but the old man just looked at him quietly, showing no sign of surrender. It wasn't until he saw that the anger on the other person's face had stiffened due to the long stalemate that he suddenly spoke and changed the subject. "You and Ned are good brothers. In the cold winter in the north, you are in urgent need of the help of a stable kingdom, so you don't have to worry about the north. I am here in the valley, and my heirs will not resist your rule in the future. Ned and I have united the river in this world, you don't need to worry about the Tully family for the time being." The old man's voice was full of reason. "The Stormlands are your family property, and the lords love you. We killed the Dorne princess and her children. Dorne will not be honest, but at most we cannot control the southern border of the kingdom. Prince Doran of Dorne is cautious in nature. He would never dare to lead the Dornish rebellion without any chance of victory. The Riverlands are very powerful and did not suffer much loss in the war, but they have a blood feud with neighbouring Dorne for thousands of years, and the two parties will not cooperate. At the same time, the heir to the Redwyne family on Arbor Island is in our hands. Earl Redwyne's fleet does not dare to act rashly, and the river bend will also be restricted by the overall situation, unless there is help from the western region, which is close to the river bend, the most important western region. Lord Tywin has already made a show of goodwill. If we marry the Westerlands, only the Reach and Dorne are still unstable in the Seven Kingdoms. Maybe we can add the Iron Islands, but these three parties have blood feuds and will never form an alliance. But if you don't marry, the Reach, the Westerlands, plus Dorne and the Iron Islands who are watching us closely, that's half the kingdom. Half the kingdom's territory, hundreds of lord families, without the rule of their feudal lords. Why do you think they obey your rule? With your Targaryen blood. How long can our status as the winner last? The old man's uninterrupted words made the anger on the face of the black-haired young man less and less, and finally completely dissipated, but he seemed to have been drained of all his energy and spirit. His face turned pale, and his body collapsed back in the chair. Seeing this, old John sighed, and the seriousness on his face also collapsed. I will arrange for the nuns to check before the wedding. He repeated what he had said before in a tired tone. No matter what the result is, the High Septon will announce that Lord Tywin's daughter Cersei is still a virgin. Yes, he will say so. In this way, no one will criticize this matter anymore. Then I will launch a search for the remnants of the Targaryen family in King's Landing, so that everyone will know the truth of the matter. What is this, John? Robert, leaning on the chair, said bitterly, Dragon Knight Aemon and his sister Naerys? Having an affair under the nose of Aegon IV? So I am the incompetent king? The future heir to the throne may not be his own. Old man, is this what you mean? This made the old man feel helpless. Robert, you have to calm down. A good king must distinguish between rumors and truth. Aegon IV became suspicious, and what was the result? The kingdom was divided, the Blackfire Rebellion broke out, and 5 generations of Targaryens had to clean up his ass. This is a bloody lesson. Don't be misled by such words again. Nothing was said. The other party seemed to have completely lost interest in speaking at this time. Seeing this, Lord John couldn't help but say again, I will find the truth of the matter, Robert, I promise. Forget it, John, you are right, it doesn't matter whether it is true or not. The black-haired young man waved his hand, looking bored, I trust you to do this, whatever you say is what it is. The old man was hesitant to speak, but after thinking about it, he sighed and didn't speak again. In fact, he already had some clues. Varys, the intelligence chief who encountered a crisis of trust, worked very hard during this period. Any news would be reported to him, the quasi-prime minister, as soon as possible. The clue was an outsider named Ben, who was highly suspected of being the source of the rumor, and they have begun to arrest him. Chapter 62. Over there, the entire city of King's Landing was in an undercurrent because of Renly's spoiler behavior, but the person involved here played the flute on an open-air platform in Maegor's Tower as if it had nothing to do with him. The high platform is at the top of Maegor's Tower, with several thick brown-grey long pillars standing quietly around it. The boy sits on the edge of the high platform, and what he can see in front of him is a vast sea with many ships moored. The cool sea breeze is blowing, the instrument is in the mouth, the fingers are moving slightly, the melodious flute sound is crisp and pleasant, the tune that seems to be full of exotic style sounds strangely cheerful, but the intermittent sound seriously affects the rhythm. The 2 guards were standing not far away. One of them, Will, leaned against the pillar with his arms crossed and said to his companion, Master Renly's blowing is really nice. The other party nodded in agreement. That's right, this is the best flute performance I've ever heard, and I've never heard this tune before. Did our young master make it up himself? By the gods, that's really amazing. They spoke loudly on purpose, and they were not too far away from the black-haired boy. Not to mention having good hearing, even normal people could hear them. This made Renly glance at them sideways, and the 2 guys praised him even more. He rolled his eyes, ignored it, and continued practicing his flute skills. The unique talent given by his profession allows him to clearly detect some subtle flaws and unnatural places in the music when playing the flute, and then he can make appropriate improvements the next time he plays the flute. The problem is that he doesn't have much lung capacity at this time, so he can't play the flute in one step, and the intermittent playing is not a good sound. However, it seems that he is the only one here who has self-knowledge at this time. Not to mention the 2 guards over there, it seems that even the animals are well versed in this. Under the sun, a black cat that was originally walking on the stone edge of the terrace was slowly approaching according to the music. After reaching a certain distance, it suddenly jumped onto a low bed in front of Renly. It was lying there on the small table. Renly, who was playing the flute, glanced at it and ignored it, while the cat lay on his back and stared at him quietly, a pair of light blue eyes constantly looking at the boy's focused face and the flute in his hand, which seemed to be filled with excitement. Attachment. Then not long after, it seemed to feel that it was not satisfied, so it rushed forward again and jumped into the arms of the black-haired boy, its head arching the velvet clothes on his belly as if enjoying it. The sound of the flute stopped abruptly, and he looked down at the little thing. Renly said displeasedly, "Go away, stay away from me. You are always losing your hair. Why don't you have any shame?" When the black cat heard this, he shrank his head tighter, as if he didn't want to pay attention. Seeing this, Renly sneered and raised his hand to give it a brain-destroying blow. So the black cat gave a grievance, glanced at his belly reluctantly, turned around and jumped down, but did not move away, but lay on the instep of the boy wearing calfskin boots, staring at Renly with its little head raised. Fluffy the tail kept wagging, as if to please his new master. That little look in his eyes gave Renly a chill. It's actually quite funny to have such a clingy cat, but now he seriously doubts whether this cat is possessed by a shapeshifter, although there are some smart cats and dogs that can understand through long-term contact. The master's words, but being able to understand everything is obviously not a normal situation. I remember correctly, there are shapeshifters in this world who can possess animals, such as a certain king of Victory in the future who rolled his eyes and hung up on the spot, so Renly believed that his suspicion was justified. But he couldn't figure out why he was so pestering. This cat was obviously very irritable when the maids were giving it a bath, scratching it, and showed no spirituality at all. But when Renly was around, it became extremely honest and extremely smart. This is another mystery, like many that he couldn't figure out before. Thinking about it, he shook his head, then put up the flute again and continued to play, but he had to put it down after a while. Under the guidance of the servant, a middle-aged man with brown hair was walking from the stairs. "Good morning, Davos." Renly raised his hand to say hello. The man approached and bowed, then glanced at the flute in the boy's hand. "What did you just blow?" he asked curiously. "2 lions," Renly said hesitantly. In fact, they were 2 tigers, but he didn't know yet how to say the word tiger in common language. "It doesn't sound like the style we have here." Davos heard the words and praised, "But the tune is beautiful and very pleasant. Your Excellency, you play really well." Renly chuckled when he heard this, feeling vaguely like he was being surrounded by licking dogs, so he changed the subject and said, "Do you have anything to do with me? Lord Stannis asked me to deliver this." Davos said as he placed a box in his hand on the table in front of Renly, "Wooden carved toys from Bravus, from a smuggler got it from a merchant." The guy in front of him was well versed in smuggling, and this obviously led to good order in certain situations in King's Landing. After hearing this, Renly opened it and took a look. He found that inside was a lifelike brown wooden sculpture of a Titan warrior with movable joints. He was not interested in it, so after taking a look, he closed the box and prepared to throw it away when he returned. In the box where Naga's ribs were kept, that's more or less his trash can. "Nothing happened, right?" he asked in a low voice. Bringing toys was just an excuse. Because he wanted easier contact, Renly asked Stannis about wanting toys a while ago. Relying on the maternal nature that was inexplicably born, it was not difficult. The former smuggler in front of him became a toy messenger. Something unexpected happened. "Several former members of the Kingswood Brotherhood want to join you," Davos whispered, telling all about his previous experiences. Renly was surprised at first, but then he understood what those people were like. "They want to take advantage of me. Sheeping wool, so to speak." Davos felt that this metaphor was a bit strange, but he didn't think much about it. "But if you need help, sir, you might as well consider it. You just need to be careful when using it." "Forget it, why do I want a bunch of people with unknown origins?" Renly shook his head after hearing this. Although he lacks mobility and manpower, he is not something that just anyone can take a liking to. Who knows if those people are traitors sent by a family enemy? Although this may be small, it is not impossible. Renly had a lot of secrets and a lot of things he wanted to do, but he obviously couldn't follow those people and ask them to do something childish and ridiculous. Even using Davos was because of the memories related to his previous life, and he took advantage of the situation. There was a group of strangers, and it was unclear what their real purpose was. Renly was not even interested in contacting them. Seeing this, Davos didn't say much. After nodding, he reported to him the current rumors in the city, and then left. After he left, Renly didn't want to stay here anymore and played the flute. He turned around and said hello, and led 2 guards down the stairs back to his residence. Instead of him barking, the black cat at his feet followed him with its tail raised until it reached the bedroom. Just before closing the door, it nimbly scurried into the room and then rubbed against the blue cat back and forth. Lee's legs squealed a few times in favor, as if they were afraid that the boy would kick her out. Renly ignored the cat. After the guard closed the door, he stepped on the soft carpet and walked towards the fireplace. The entrance to the fireplace was currently blocked by bricks and stones, and the secret passage inside was basically unusable. At this time, the sunlight streaming in from the balcony was strong, but Renly stepped on a stool and lit a tallow candle on the narrow platform on the fireplace. The smoke rose, and the quietly burning candle light seemed dimmer compared to the surrounding light. A simple tray made of lanterns was then fastened to the candles, and a golden egg was placed on the top of the hollow shelf in the tray by Renly. Then he lay down on the fireplace platform, staring at the golden eggs that were constantly roasting in the flames without blinking. His little face was melancholy. He originally expected the egg to perform miracles, but gradually he stopped thinking so because it was as hard as a rock. When he was playing with the egg on the balcony 2 days ago, the egg in his hand was accidentally touched by the cat and fell out of the window. Renly was shocked at that time, but when he hurried out to search for it afterwards, he found that this egg fell from such a height and was still intact. This actually made Renly sober a lot. After thinking for a long time, he found a small hammer and found that he couldn't break the thing no matter how hard he hit it. Renly then tried to bake it, but was unable to do so. Because it is not afraid of fire. No matter how much Renly tried to bake it, candles or kitchen stove fires, the egg would not be cooked at all. It was really like a stone that could not be eaten, could not be hatched, and could not be smashed. Just think of it as a souvenir. As he murmured, Renly glanced at the black cat that was walking around with its head raised next to the stool under him. He had the urge to throw the egg to his pet as a cat ball, but after thinking about it, he still collected the egg. Stand up. It was cold and hard to hand, without any heat from being burned by the flames. With nowhere to start, he decided not to pay attention to the egg for the time being, and decided to focus on honing his professional abilities, and then find an opportunity to go out and take back the remaining medium. However, just when he was about to throw this thing into the corner box to eat dust, it happened to have a new change. Chapter 63. As a 5-year-old boy, although he had no parental love and his 2 brothers didn't pay much attention to him, Renly was still not treated harshly in some material conditions. He basically had the best food and clothing since he was a child, and there was no need to say more about education. Although the place he lived in seemed a little simple, that was just his opinion. And in some entertainment, he also had everything he needed. In his early years at Storm's End, an uncle liked Renly very much. Every time a caravan passed by Storm's End, he would always buy him some interesting toys. Wooden knights, rag dolls, building blocks, exquisite wreaths and hand-woven fabrics, etc. He even bought various puppets that only professionals could manipulate. Later, his uncle died, and it was Maester Crescent's turn to take care of him. The old man would get him some toys from time to time, and also made him some simple armor knight swords with tin and wood. There were a lot of these things accumulated, which were useless to Renly, but he never threw them away, only occasionally giving 1 or 2 away when children of his same age came to play with him. Now these toys have accumulated into 2 large boxes, and the butler brought them to him when he left Storm's End. The servants of Maegor's Holdfast would come to his bedroom every day to clean, change the curtains, sheets, carpets, etc., but usually they would not pay any attention to Renly's toy boxes. In addition, these 2 boxes were also locked by Renly, and now the key was hanging around his neck with the bronze ring. So for Renly, there is no safer place for him to hide things than a toy box. The Naga ribs brought from the Iron Islands before had magical effects and could attract fish. Renly once regarded them as treasures, so he hid them in a box. When he found that the pocket dragon egg in his hand was a useless egg, he also planned to throw it in. However, just after he did this, changes occurred. Inside the wooden box, when the golden pocket dragon egg touched a broken bone the length of a palm that he had hidden at the bottom of the toy gap, it suddenly trembled as if it had come alive. At first, Renly thought that it might be his eyes that were dazzled, but when he couldn't help but take out both objects and bump them against each other, he found that the egg in his hand suddenly began to tremble again. What is this? He looked at the two objects in his hands in confusion, and experimented back and forth. There was no movement when the distance was far away, but as long as they touched each other, the egg and the bone would move inexplicably. That's right, not only the egg, but even the bone began to tremble, although it was very weak, but it could be clearly felt. However, this tremor only occurred when it was in contact at the beginning, and there was no change even if it was pressed together. After observing for a long time, Renly looked confused. After repeated experiments, nothing else happened. So after thinking about it, he simply wrapped the two things with a white handkerchief with silver edges, and then carefully placed them at the bottom of the wooden box. He seemed a little absent-minded that day, and after dinner at night, he couldn't wait to crawl under the bed and open the box to see if there was anything new. But when he got up the next day and opened the box, he suddenly found that the egg that seemed to be wrapped in golden scales was now stained with some sparse bone-white particles on the surface. And the bone next to it seemed to have become rounder. He had a vague guess. In the next few days, he paid close attention to the situation in the toy box, and then found that the bone-white particles on the egg increased day by day, and the broken rib gradually became rounder and smaller. Apart from that, there was no new change. However, Renly's expectation for this became stronger and stronger. He guessed that when the rib disappeared, the answer to the question of whether the egg would change might surface. Unfortunately, the tree wants to be quiet but the wind does not stop. Before he can really see the changes, another unexpected news suddenly arrives. The former bandits mentioned by the smugglers were suddenly surrounded by the King's Landing gold cloaks, and a guy named Oswin was captured. When Renly heard the news, he was sitting on the balcony of his bedroom, staring at the sea with a large number of ships anchored outside the castle, and thinking about whether the curse he had on him would also take effect at the moment. As a result, while he was daydreaming aimlessly, the servant led the brown-haired middle-aged man in. They followed the clues of a singer and tracked down the people of the Kingswood Brotherhood. After sending the servant away, Davos's first sentence made Renly look startled, and then he stared at him and found that the former smuggler looked very serious at this time. No one heard anything, but the gold cloaks suddenly surrounded the inn where the bandits were staying. Ben, who was pregnant, was killed on the spot. A bandit named Oswin was seriously injured and captured. Only the white deer Wenda and her son lived in another room. After sensing the danger, they jumped out of the window and ran away. Did they go to find you? Renly asked. Yes. Davos frowned and nodded, I have hidden them in a safe place in Flea Bottom. The gold cloaks should not be able to find them. Despite this, neither the smuggler nor Renly felt much comfort at this time. After a moment of silence, Renly asked, will he give you away? This is the crux of the problem. White Deer Wenda claimed that Oswin would never betray them. Davos said, but I have never seen him, so I can't be sure of his character. He sighed bitterly. I was not careful, otherwise I would not have been targeted by those bandits. You can't blame me for that. Renly said seriously, I asked you to do everything. In fact, I want to do that, my lord. The other shook his head, Lannister killed many of my friends. Renly didn't speak again, but sat there with his head down, and began to think of a way. One of those guys who volunteered was captured now, which means that the clues are likely to be traced to Davos, which means danger. Although they can stir up trouble in King's Landing, it's only because they are in the dark and others have nowhere to start. If they are really caught with clues, they will be vulnerable. Renly is not worried about his own safety, because even if the person in front of him is caught and confesses the truth, it is hard for people to believe that a 5-year-old child is the mastermind of this matter. It's just that he's busy doing all sorts for me, but he's facing life danger in return. If I don't care or even distance myself from him, I'd be a nobody. His mind kept turning, and some information about the current situation in King's Landing flashed through his mind. Suddenly, a thought came to his mind, so the boy asked thoughtfully, do you think Lord Mace Tyrell of the Reach is a fool, Davos? I'm going out in the afternoon, so I'll post this chapter in advance tonight. Chapter 64. Do you think Lord Mace Tyrell of the Reach is a fool, Davos? The breeze was blowing outside the window, and the light on the balcony was bright and warm. The boy's words made Davos shake his head. I have never met the Lord of the Reach, sir. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect what we are going to do next. Davos was stunned when he heard this, and then he squatted down and listened attentively. Mace Tyrell has an unmarried younger sister. Renly, who was sitting on a small chair, said while sorting out his thoughts, she is about 11 or 12 years old. When he was at Storm's End, the old maester had given him a detailed introduction to the Tyrell family in the besieged city. The old duke died early, and the new duke had 2 sisters, one married and the other unmarried. Renly had some impression of this, and now he was preparing to use this. She is a little small, but it is not impossible. I don't know what she looks like, but she must be more beautiful than Cersei of the Lannister family. You can figure out what she looks like. So you want to? Davos vaguely guessed the boy's thoughts, but he was still a little uncertain. Renly stared at him without blinking and said, we should praise her, publicize how she is a good match for Robert, praise her for her fertility since she was a child, and most importantly, how she admires my brother. I heard that when the Duke of Mace was hostile to us, he fell out with the family. Thinking about it, Renly suddenly had an idea, so he said, add one more thing, she is very wild, like a she-wolf, and then he began to talk about what to do about this matter in detail. There are hundreds of lords and noble families in the 7 kingdoms, but there are only a few who are at the same level as Baratheon, who are worthy of the new king and can be picked out to compete with the Westerlands. The Stark family is the most respected in the north. The current Lord Stark is Robert's good brother. The Lord of the Vale is the Arryn family. Lord Arryn is Robert's adoptive father and a natural ally. Moreover, neither of them has female relatives who meet the requirements. The Tully family, the Lord of the Riverlands, is an ally, but slightly inferior. Although there are people in King's Landing, they are not strong enough and their daughters have all been married. No one from the 2 major families of Dorne and the Iron Islands came. The fiefdom of the Baratheon family is the Stormlands. After thinking about it, the only family that can make a move in the 7 kingdoms is the newly surrendered Lord of the Reach, the Tyrell family. Although it is unlikely that they will really succeed in marrying Robert, Renly did not expect this. Now, the main purpose of targeting the Tyrell family is to attract attention and divert the trouble to others. Or, he thinks that if he is lucky, maybe the Duke of the Riverland, who is not sure whether he is stupid or not, is operating this matter at this time. After all, Cersei in the West is now in a shaky reputation due to rumors, which is a bad thing for the Lannister family, but it is a rare opportunity for some people. Overall, such a derogation and praise is like a series of conspiracies launched by someone who is unwilling to fail. If it can really coordinate with the possible actions of the Duke of the Riverland, it will be more misleading. This matter is a bit dishonorable. Davos felt more and more pressured as he listened, and finally couldn't help saying, if it is really a little girl in her teens. This is a family event, not a personal decision. Renly replied, everything is the Duke of Mace who wants the family to have a queen to solve the decline caused by standing on the wrong side. What does it have to do with the little girl? It sounds strange, but it is indeed the truth, but the brown-haired middle-aged man is still hesitant about it. But if there is unrest because of this, won't we become sinners? This little thing can cause unrest, and the 7 kingdoms would have been in chaos long ago. So Davos gritted his teeth and nodded. Seeing this, Renly said again, the effect may not be very good, and repeating it a second time will also be very risky, so we don't need to do it like last time. You should focus on groups such as singers and bards, ask them to compose new songs, and ask them to sing on the streets, in front of brothels, and anywhere else, as long as there are nobles. Our goal is to let Lannister and my eldest brother know about this. You don't have to do it yourself, you can hire beggars to help contact, which may cost a lot of money, but there are many valuables in Maegor's Tower, I can steal some, and you should be able to cash them out. Will this cause trouble for you, my lord? Renly waved his hand. No, the secret passage thing hasn't been resolved yet anyway. It's normal for thieves to use secret passages to steal things. After discussing the details, Davos bowed and left. Looking at his back, Renly sighed. I hope this works. Thinking, he suddenly remembered that the younger sister of the Duke of Mace seemed to have been engaged since childhood. This is fucking. He secretly had a headache, and felt that these things were really inexplicable. It was just a gold coin, how could it turn out like this? How stupid must those bandits who came to give themselves up be to think of surrendering to a little brat like him. Renly didn't see Davos again for a while. Maybe he was very busy, or something bad happened. In short, he was in the Red Castle, with no news, and didn't overhear much useful information. So he had to stay near Magur's tower all day to practice his instrument. When he got the profession, he had many memories of using musical instruments, but knowing how to use them doesn't mean he can use them. Although all the musical instruments he could find were sent to him after he gave the order, his physical condition was really not good. He was short of breath when playing the flute, so he could only play it intermittently. His skin was too tender, so his hands hurt when playing the harp, and tying cloth strips on his fingers was not very useful. Only the violin could be practiced normally, so that Magur's tower had been emitting bursts of shrill screams all day long recently. It was hard to say whether this was because Renly was not good at learning or because he was absent-minded because of something. The recent theft of Magur's tower attracted some attention, but as Renly expected, no one suspected that there was an insider, and no one thought that the real thief would be the future king's younger brother. At the same time, the fusion of the dragon egg and the broken bone was still continuing. It seemed to be slow, but it never stopped. Renly would observe these two things every day, while silently waiting for good news that might come at any time. Or bad news. But when the Duke of the North and his party returned, he could no longer remain so still. Although he was not eager to find that kind of copy medium at present, it was still necessary to investigate the situation. He did not forget that there was a magical marshlander among the northerners. So after hearing the news, he hurriedly left Magur's tower with his guards and walked towards the throne room. It was because of this that he suddenly heard some movement about the rumor incident. Someone praised my little sister for her beauty, why should I stop it? Is my little sister ugly? The elegant accent of the river Reach floated from the corner of the square outside the throne room. At this time, Renly was approaching from the paved road behind. After hearing this sentence, he looked over unconsciously. A familiar tall figure with brown hair came into view, well dressed and handsome, but his expression seemed a little dissatisfied. It's a good thing that a singer can praise it on his own initiative. Why do you ask me to stop it? The person talking to him was a middle-aged man wearing a cloak, a black woolen short robe and breeches. Now that his back was facing Renly's direction, his face could not be seen, but Renly's voice was also heard clearly by his sharp ears. This is a conspiracy, Duke, we must not be used by others. Conspiracy? Of course, I know it's a conspiracy, so we can find out who is using us, but why should we stop those singers? The Duke of the Riverland said with great interest. We should push for it. We are so passive in this situation now. But if my sister can become the queen. Queen, don't you understand what this means? This is impossible, my lord. And Miss Jenna is already engaged to the Fossoway family. Publicizing this matter would be tantamount to public humiliation. My younger sister is indeed engaged, but the marriage has not been consummated yet. Don't you know that the engagement can actually be cancelled? I have 3 sons. At most, I can let one of my sons marry a daughter of the Green Apple family. They will just happily cancel the engagement with us. What accidents can there be? Think about it carefully. There is only one king. The voice did not continue, because Mace Tyrell noticed Renly and his party approaching. Of course, he did not think that his words had been overheard. Facing the black-haired boy, he raised his hand and greeted him with a smile. Renly responded politely to the other party, and on the surface, it was not clear what immoral things he had done before. But from the current point of view, it seems that the Duke of Mace seems to be enjoying it. The black-haired boy's inner depression was slightly relieved, and when he walked into the throne room, he saw a figure he had been waiting for a long time. Stannis, who had not been seen for a long time, was standing in the gap between the pillars of the throne room near the Iron Throne, and the smuggler Davos, who was dressed in black cloth, stood behind him intact. After seeing Renly enter, he secretly made a reassuring gesture to the boy. Renly was completely relieved, and then looked at Eddard Stark, who was standing under the throne and reporting something to Robert. When he saw this again, Renly found that he seemed to be a little tanned, and his cheeks became thinner, but his spine was still straight. Not far from him, Renly saw the target he really wanted to see. However, when his eyes swept over the short marshlander, a situation that had been ignored before suddenly emerged in his mind, making him look stunned. He did not smell the smell again. Chapter 65. The bright sunshine poured in from the sky, and many white catkins outside the window kept fluttering with the sea breeze blowing from the castle, like countless dandelions dancing, and like the familiar summer snow slowly falling in my hometown. However, these were just some poplar seeds blown out by the wind in the Red Castle Godwood forest. They looked like or not, but they were not the same thing after all. Standing in front of the window and watching all this silently, Ed Stark had a blank expression on his face, but his grey eyes were full of complex emotions, expectations, melancholy, and a trace of unconcealable sadness. The last time I came to King's Landing, there were traces of war everywhere, but now I see a brand new kingdom. His voice was depressed and low, but it was enough for people to hear clearly. In the room behind him, the short Marshlander was sitting on a chair and silently wiping a dagger with an oilcloth. Hearing this, he replied, "Everything is changing, my lord, including this castle." "Yes, including this castle," Ed murmured, and suddenly laughed. "When Benyon was a kid, he made a bet with me about which castle in the Seven Kingdoms was the strongest. I said it was Harrenhal in the Riverlands, but he kept claiming it was the Red Castle, because that's where the king lives." "Then your brother might be disappointed now," the Cranberry said meaningfully. "The Red Castle is probably the most dangerous one in the Seven Kingdoms." "He won't be disappointed, because he changed his mind later," Edward said. "He said the Black Castle under the wall is the strongest." "You know, Howland, there's not even a wall over the Black Castle, how can it be called strong?" After that, he shook his head. "He said he would become a night watchman when we go back." The words didn't sound unusual, but the Duke of the North was obviously still immersed in the grief of his younger sister's death. The Cranberry sighed sadly after hearing this, and then forced a smile to change the subject. "They all say that the Tyrells want a queen." The Cranberry was talking about the gossip that had been circulating in the noble circle of King's Landing recently. In order to make his sister the queen, Mace Tyrell, the Duke of the Reach, bribed some low-class people in King's Landing to spread rumors about the Lannister family in the West, and then hired singers to flatter his own sister. The main reason was to replace the Lannister family, who might become royal relatives, to make up for the disadvantages caused by the loss of the war. It is said that the Lannisters and the Tyrells had a dispute over this, but the Marshlanders had just returned a few days ago and were unable to see it with their own eyes, which made him regretful. Mace Tyrell stood on the Targaryen side in the war, and his vassal Randall Tarley also made Robert suffer. Eddard heard this and said, "But if I were asked to choose, I would choose a woman from the Tyrell family as my wife, not a Lannister." This seemed to have a deep meaning, so the Swamplander asked thoughtfully, "Has Lord Robert made his choice?" "The new king will be crowned in 3 days, and the news that King Robert is about to marry a Lannister woman as queen will spread throughout the Seven Kingdoms," Eddard said in a complicated tone. "In fact, Lord Tywin has written to Casterly Rock to summon his daughter, which means that we will have to attend a wedding soon." When he said this, his eyes were fixed on the world outside the castle without blinking, and his voice was undisguised. "I'm tired, Holland, we will return to the north after Robert's wedding is over." The Swamplander nodded silently, and then the room fell into silence. Until the man at the window suddenly thought of something, turned his head to look at his subordinate, and subconsciously lowered his voice. "Is the child okay? She has stopped crying recently. The new nanny is very experienced and takes good care of her." The Marshlander replied, "My lord, I suggest we take her with us when we go back. Then we must ensure that she has enough milk." Thinking of the size of the nanny, Eddard was a little worried. "We must be careful about this matter. It is difficult for us to find another nanny on the road. So, there is nothing for us to do." A crisp voice sounded from the balcony of the room in Magur's tower. A boy in exquisite black leather clothes was sitting on a carved chair and asked the brown-haired middle-aged man sitting opposite. The sun was strong outside the window. The golden crown stag emblem on the boy's chest was shining brightly. The silver-inlaid deer eyes also flashed as the boy's upper body swayed slightly. He wore loose brown trousers on his lower body and was barefoot without shoes, looking like a home dress. A fluffy black cat was lying under the round table in front of him, rolling over and over as the little master's feet slowly rubbed it, like a toy, but it didn't seem to be impatient at all. Instead it squinted its eyes and purred, looking like it was enjoying itself. Davos, who was sitting opposite, was drinking a sip of barley tea at this time, looking like he had just finished speaking, and nodded after hearing this. "The Lion family has given up the investigation. The Rose family is still investigating, but they are short of manpower in King's Landing and pose no threat to us." Renly nodded after hearing this, feeling quite amused. He had remembered one thing wrong before, that is, the sister of Duke Tyrell was already engaged. He was a little nervous about this, but he didn't know if he was really stupid or had some confidence. The Duke of Mace of the Tyrell family actually planned to run over to compete for the position of queen, completely ignoring the previous engagement and the possible impact of this matter. After he did this, everyone's suspicions disappeared, and they all clearly determined that the rumors from some time ago were caused by the Tyrells. As a result, the Lannisters' anger was successfully led to the Reach, and it may be true, as some people claimed, that the captured bandit did not betray them, and no one was seen causing trouble for Davos. In short, under all circumstances, on the fourth day of the return of the Northerners, which is now, this matter has basically come to an end, because Robert has made a decision in public. Renly felt a little regretful about this, because the Duke's fight for the throne had failed, and every drop of the dirty water he had poured out was swallowed up by his cheap brother. In other words, the memory Cersei, who smiles all day long, will still become the future queen. But Renly wasn't too upset about this. He didn't believe that there were rumors, that Cersei had the guts to turn her back on Robert and have a baby brother, and he didn't believe that his sister-in-law really gave birth to a blonde son, and Robert would foolishly think that it was his own. Thinking of this, Renly suddenly asked, "Where is Wenda the White Deer? What did she say?" He was asking about the remaining member of the stupid bandits from a while ago, who had been secretly hidden by Davos. She originally wanted to save her companions, but the captured bandit had been beheaded. She had nowhere to go and was planning to take her son back to the Kingswood. Davos said and couldn't help but said, "She is a talent, sir. Maybe you can really use her." "What is it used for?" Renly was surprised when he heard this. The person in front of him seemed to be very optimistic about the female bandit. "Running errands, working as a maid, she can do anything. It would be a pity to send her back to raise pigs," the former smuggler said with admiration, "and she is also literate." Literacy. Renly swayed on his feet, thought for a moment, and asked, "Is she reliable?" "I believe she is reliable because the facts have been proven," Davos replied. "Then she is very familiar with the nobles from all over the Seven Kingdoms. She used to kidnap nobles for a living," Davos answered. "Kidnapping?" After hearing this, the boy's mind flashed with the image of the Zeddy man unconsciously, so he squinted his eyes. "I'll write a note later, and then you can hand it to her for me. If she can help me accomplish this, then I can take her son as a servant, and if I become a lord in the future, I can also consider training him to be a knight, and she herself can." As he said that, he suddenly frowned, then lowered his head and looked under the table in front of him. The black cat was lying there biting his heel with its sharp teeth, and then he screamed dissatisfiedly when Renly stared at him. "Is yours a cat, a human, or a dog?" Renly was very curious about the real situation of this cat, but he had studied this cat for a while before and couldn't figure out anything. Now he was too lazy to think about it, so after rolling his eyes at it, he started trampling the clingy cat like dough with his feet again. "You can come and be my maid, or female guard, or something." The black-haired boy looked away and finished what he was about to say. "If she wants to." Davos nodded after hearing this, chatted with the boy some more daily words, and finally left the room with a parchment scroll full of words. However, he had just left Magur's tower when he suddenly saw Stannis staring at him quietly in a long corridor. "Is this the first time you've come to see Renly?" the other party asked. Chapter 66. How many times have you come to see Renly? Although the words coming from the front sounded plain and emotionless, the person concerned felt nervous. "My lord, I..." The former smuggler paused for a moment, then bowed his head and said, "I was just telling Lord Renly about things outside. He is very curious about King's Landing and likes to hear some customs and interesting stories in the streets and alleys." When speaking, Davos felt quite ashamed. He swore allegiance to Stannis, and his current status and position were also given by the other party, but now he was lying to him. But he couldn't help saying this. The matter involved very complicated things. Since he had agreed to do it, it was difficult to tell the truth. It sounded like there was nothing wrong with this, but the other party was very keen to find the abnormality in Davos' words. "Lord Renly? More than 10 years of smuggling have made you so respectful to a child? Or is my onion knight a very polite person?" This made Davos feel bad, but his smuggling career brought him more than just rich experience in ship operation, so he lowered his head and responded, "It's just because the child always calls me sir, so I call him sir. I mean, when we were at Storm's End, Lord Stannis, before you made me a knight, he called me that." After saying that, seeing that the other party was still looking at him quietly, the brown-haired middle-aged man added carefully. I said at the beginning that I was not a knight and could not be called sir, and the child said that he was not an adult either, and then we called each other like this, privately, and we are used to it. Is that so? The other party nodded slowly after hearing this, looked at him for a few times, and suddenly said, he has been very strange since he was a child. The brown-haired middle-aged man was stunned after hearing this, but the other party did not pay attention to his expression, squinted his eyes, and seemed to be immersed in past memories. After his parents were shipwrecked, I thought he had no idea what happened. After all, he was just a baby less than a year old, but the facts were completely the opposite of what I thought. After the storm, many servants cried like us, and my uncle also hid in his room to wipe his tears, but who would be really sad? Those servants were busy with the succession ceremony of the new duke in a few days, and they had completely forgotten the old duke. My uncle also always talked to Robert about this and that. Cresson kept writing letters to inform the 7 kingdoms of the birth of the young duke, as if this was a happy event. As he said, his blue eyes focused and looked at the brown-haired middle-aged man in front of him again. I observed everyone in the castle, and it seemed that only the baby who was less than 1 year old was still sad for the death of his parents. Later, I always thought it was my illusion. After all, he was too young at the time, what could he understand? These words made Davos hesitate whether to respond, but the other party did not intend to hear any answer. After thinking silently for a moment, he suddenly smiled. He likes to hear it, so you should talk to him more. He shook his head and turned away. Looking at the other person's back, Davos breathed a sigh of relief, but felt a little strange in his heart. Did this lord really not find anything, or was he pretending not to see it? Renly obviously didn't expect that he was targeted when he was a cradle, and it was the cheap second brother who was as smelly and hard as a stone in the toilet in his eyes. At this time, he was thinking about other problems. The secret passage and the Queen's rumors, these 2 things are basically over, but new problems have emerged, that is, the Marshlander and his dagger. The Marshlander has a dagger on him, which is the medium that allows him to enter the historical copy. At first, when he found that he couldn't smell that smell, he thought that the Marshlander didn't bring it with him. However, after careful observation, Renly found that the truth was not so. The dagger was still intact in the leather sheath on the other side of the waist because there was a mark of a fish beam leaf on the wooden handle of the dagger. Renly could recognize it. But the question is, why did the smell on the dagger disappear? This discovery made him pay attention. Why? Is it because the dagger is just a fake dagger with the same mark? The real dagger is somewhere else? Or something inside has disappeared? Or is the problem with himself? All kinds of doubts are entangled in his heart, but it is useless to think about it blindly, so Renly plans to complete the task that he did not complete at Storm's End, get this dagger. Unfortunately, the Marshlanders do not live in the Red Castle. After meeting once, they never met again. There are many people in the Red Castle, and Renly cannot follow an attack by himself, so he can only borrow the hands of others. He was not sure if this could be done, but for now he had to do it this way. At this moment, he even needed an excuse to leave Magur's holdfast, let alone run to the city outside the castle. So Renly could only wait silently. Robert would be crowned in 3 days, but that had nothing to do with him. He would just be responsible for watching and being a decoration. He might be asked to be a boyfriend at the wedding in a while, but Renly didn't think it was a big deal. But he didn't plan to continue to be lazy. The situation of the Marshlanders changed his mentality, so Renly decided to find an opportunity to leave the Red Keep and then go to the hill to get another medium. If that one also lost its smell. Other than that, all that's left is the egg. Thinking of this, Renly rubbed the cat's feet on the balcony, then slid off the chair, walked to the feather bed not far away, and climbed in. The black cat followed, but was pushed away by Renly. He then used the key hanging around his neck to unlock the heavy wooden box in front of him, and then opened it to take a look. At this time, the thing wrapped in the handkerchief was hidden in the gaps between a pile of wood and cloth toys. Renly took it out and opened it to see a broken bone the size of a thumb and a strange egg. In eyes. The broken bones are much smaller than before, and the eggs are no longer what they used to be. At this time, it looks like an exquisite piece of art. The oval surface is smooth and natural. The bright gold and pale grey are all over the egg body, as if it is dotted with diamonds of 2 magnificent colors. It is instantly recognizable at a glance. It can be seen that it is of great value. But apart from the change in appearance, Renly didn't see anything else happen. You're not saying that nothing else happened at all, are you? Thinking secretly, he shook his head. In any case, change is better than no change. If it hadn't been for this, he would have had no choice but to eat the ashes in the corner, and now, at least it looks more valuable. With this thought in mind, he weighed the egg in his hand and considered that if he became impoverished in the future, he could get a lot of money by selling this thing. However, when he did this, something changed. But with a little force, this usually harmless behavior suddenly made the egg make a clicking sound, and before Renly could react, a message suddenly appeared. You have discovered an abundant source of life. After eating it, your body will undergo some deep mysterious changes. Chapter 67. What is the difference in taste between dragon eggs and chicken eggs? Renly felt that there was nothing too strange about the difference. They were all very sticky and had a fishy smell, but there was a special spiciness that lingered in his mouth for a long time after swallowing. At the same time, it was not even on his fingers. You also get the same feeling after carefully touching a little juice. It reminded him of the pain that burned his skin when he cut chili peppers in his previous life. Of course, if you consider the color of the egg white and yolk of a dragon egg, it can be clearly distinguished from an egg. It was not a normal viscous translucent liquid, but a bright red color with a hint of gold. After thinking for a long time, Renly couldn't think of an appropriate word to describe it. It doesn't seem right to say rose gold, and it's really unreliable to say dark gold. So it can be seen from these thoughts that he is actually very free now, and he has not upgraded on the spot or opened up the Rondu and Du's second meridians like after eating the treasures of heaven and earth. Of course, it can be seen that after the news, or after the egg suddenly cracked, he actually ate the egg. Although he went through repeated entanglements and hesitations in the process, after all, that the information suggests that some source of life has been discovered, but it does not specify what kind of changes will occur after eating it, obvious or hidden. Good or bad? Will there be scales on my body? Even after swallowing the egg raw, Renly was still worried about it. After eating it, he didn't notice any other feeling besides the spicy taste. Even though the spicy taste reached his stomach in one step, it was not serious, but just slight, as if countless small bugs were gnawing slightly inside his body. After waiting for a long time, nothing special happened, not even that prompt appeared again. After standing by the bed and smashing his mouth, Renly looked down at the emptied gorgeous eggshell in his hand, wondering if it had no effect because he didn't eat the eggshell at the same time. So he broke off a crystal clear dragon shell fragment and chewed it slowly in his mouth. The shell of the dragon egg is crunchy and crisp, and it no longer has the hardness that could not be broken with a hammer, but it tastes like durian mixed with stinky tofu. It's not the smell, but the taste. The taste is slightly rotten, mixed with a hint of unbearable sourness. After reluctantly swallowing a mouthful, his little face wrinkled into a ball, and he couldn't bear the second mouthful and spit it out directly. Forget it, nothing happened. Who knows if you will get diarrhea after eating it? Thinking about this, he felt that it would be a waste not to eat this thing. After all, he remembered correctly that egg shells are nutritious. Some oviparous animals seem to be eaten by their shells when they are just born. So after thinking about it, he wrapped the eggshell in the original handkerchief and put it back in his trash can. Nothing unexpected happened after that, except that he choked during dinner, which caused several servants to run up to him in surprise and slapped and knocked him. Everything went as usual. He lit candles in the room alone for half the night, and Renly didn't do anything. I feel like I have any special feelings, not even a stomachache. So he fell asleep with regret. That night he had a dream, in which he dreamed of a giant dragon covered with scales like molten gold, looking down at him from the depths of the dim hall shrouded in mist. The dragon's head was ferocious but handsome, and it had a pair of bright red eyes. It was like two bleeding wounds, brightly reflecting the appearance of the short boy below looking up. The dragon then opened its big mouth, and the surging blue flames rushed towards it, swallowing the boy completely. As a result, his outer skin withered and turned black, and eventually fell off like old wall coverings. His inner muscles followed closely, and then his blood and internal organs. However, at this moment, Renly felt no pain at all. Instead, he only felt a coldness that penetrated his bones. The blue breath that rushed towards him and completely engulfed him seemed not to be fire, but the sea. Endless sea. When Renly got up the next day, he thought back but couldn't remember what happened in the dream. He just remembered that the dream seemed unusual. Then at night, this familiar dream came back again. It was still the same the next day, but again without any special circumstances. The change occurred on the third day, the day of King Robert's coronation. The coronation of the new king requires a very cumbersome process, including anointing with holy oil, reciting oaths, and a ceremony held in person by a very fat archbishop and several other archbishops in St. Bell's Cathedral in King's Landing. The solemn, sacred, and special atmosphere brought about by the ceremony made people's heads swell in the vast hall, which was extremely silent. Only the archbishop's deep chant could be heard clearly. At this time, hundreds of well-dressed nobles were watching the ceremony, standing quietly between the long columns on both sides of the church, looking at the black-haired young man half kneeling on the ground in the center and the archbishop in front of him. Tywin Lannister, Jon Arryn, Hoster Tully, Eddard Stark. The major dukes and princes from the Seven Kingdoms who are rarely seen in normal times are all gathered together. Behind them are the secondary lords and nobles under their respective command, and there are countless minor nobles and knights behind the secondary nobles. As the younger brother of the new king, Renly naturally could not be absent from this special occasion. He even stood not far from the side of the High Bishop, standing with his second brother Stannis, so he could clearly see the tense facial expression of his cheap elder brother at the moment, and the spit that splashed unconsciously when the fat High Bishop muttered. The oath of the ceremony was long and cumbersome, but it was finally finished. Then the fat High Bishop dragged the golden crown inlaid with rubies and black diamonds with both hands and slowly buckled it on Robert's head, announcing that he would stand up in the name of Robert I of the Baratheon family, King of the Andals, Rhoynar and the First Men, ruler of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm. The young king stood up, and the ceremony ended here. Countless bells rang out at the same time outside, and the sound spread throughout the city. Amid the cheers, the ministers knelt on one knee, and Renly was among them, but he looked dazed at the moment, feeling dizzy, as if the countless people around him were emitting waves of double images. After shaking his head, the feeling disappeared, so Renly thought that he might have a little low blood pressure. Next, the king led the team to patrol the entire King's Landing. All the lords and nobles present followed. The mighty team formed a long snake from the square in front of the cathedral. At first glance, it looked like a large army. Most of the people in the team rode horses, but they were also accompanied by carriages. As a child, Renly was in a carriage. Therefore, after getting on the carriage, no one noticed that the boy looked listless, his eyelids were open and closed, and he was drowsy, and finally fell into a coma. It rained heavily last night, and now the rain has stopped, but the ground is quite muddy. Under the bright sunshine, the gorgeous carriage with wheels and bearings rubbing against each other followed a large number of knights, moving slowly along the dirty roads of King's Landing. There were golden robe guards on both sides to maintain order, and a group of civilians watching outside. The cheers around never stopped, and with a large number of colorful flowers being thrown down, the heroic King Robert rode his horse in the front, feeling the upward gazes from all directions, and finally showed a heroic smile on his face that he had not shown recently. The dukes following behind him were all dressed gorgeously, and the horses under them were also dressed in gold and silver, making it difficult for people to ignore them. In this case, no one would care about a certain carriage dotted in the team, and no one would notice that when the wheels of the carriage rolled over, some turbid sewage inexplicably gathered slowly on the brick-paved but muddy ground, but suddenly dispersed after the carriage moved away. Chapter 68. The bachelors later recorded mostly the same words, such as the new king's outstanding demeanor, the elegant and noble demeanor of the lords, etc., but in fact, many things happened on the day of King Robert's coronation. First, when the team passed by Flea Bottom, someone threw a pile of feces from the third floor and hit the back of Duke Tywin, who was in the front of the team and wearing gorgeous armor. The scarlet cloak embroidered with a proud lion was immediately contaminated and unbearable to look at. Then some of the splashed liquid even rebounded to the face of a brother behind him. The surroundings were in uproar, and the angry roar attracted the attention of the whole team. At the same time, among the people watching on both sides, no one knew who made a long beast shout. The sound was intermittent and aroused people's reverie, as if satirizing something. The always steady Duke Tywin was gloomy by this series of situations, while the new King Robert was furious and ordered a strict investigation of the people nearby to find out who was disrupting his coronation ceremony. After a commotion, several people were arrested, but it was not possible to determine who was the real culprit, which also delayed the journey. The team continued on the road after a while, but not long after, a disheveled woman hurried over and began to shout a name outside the blockade of the Golden Cloaks. So a short man following the Duke of the North rode his horse to approach, but soon he ran back with a changed face and said something, then left the team and left in a panic. Eddard Stark did not leave with him, but this iron brother of Robert seemed very absent-minded during the rest of the journey. Later, the team also encountered a sloppy drunkard who urinated on the street, and an old beggar who was not mentally normal ran up and begged loudly. Several prostitutes hid behind the windows of the wooden buildings on both sides, exposing their breasts and seducing the knights passing by on the street below. As a result, they were seen by Stanny, who was in a bad mood because of the previous incident. So he went to find the commander of the Capitol Guard who was responsible for the security of King's Landing on the spot and sternly demanded that this unruly troublemaking brothel be closed. However, all this barely affected the overall itinerary of the team. After a whole afternoon of smooth patrol, the team began to return to the Red Castle, and the coronation ceremony was completely over. A grand dinner followed. The butler had started to prepare for this banquet several days ago. In the next 2 days, King's Landing would hold a tournament to celebrate the coronation of the new king. Therefore, a group of knights were eager to talk loudly with the people around them, vowing to have a good time at the banquet and the tournament. Then someone discovered that the king's younger brother Renly had been unconscious in the carriage for an unknown period of time. His body was cold and his face was pale, as if he was seriously ill. After another round of chaos, the seriously ill boy was sent back to Maegor's tower, and Grand Maester Pycelle hurriedly followed. The banquet in the Red Castle was not affected by this and was still held as usual, but a gust of wind that night suppressed the excitement of the banquet to the lowest point. The wind outside was howling, and although the banquet inside was quite noisy, it also seriously affected the atmosphere. The heavy rain that came not long after made the banquet fall into a trough. The heavy rain came violently, and the lords and nobles in the core of the hall were not affected at all. They still ate and laughed as usual, but the open-air seats outside and some small nobles near the edge of the hall were drenched by the heavy rain. When the banquet ended, the ambition of some groups to have a big meal had long been forgotten, and they turned to worry about whether they would catch a cold. Not to mention, several people really caught a bad cold afterwards. The rainstorm continued on the second day, and the roars in the gloomy sky sounded one after another. The rain washed the stone brick surface with a rustling sound, but it became a crackling sound when it was poured on the muddy road. This rain seriously affected the martial arts competition that was scheduled to be held later, and it also suppressed the solemn atmosphere that should have been there for the coronation of the new king to the lowest point. The only thing worth affirming is that the air in King's Landing became much clearer because of the rainstorm, and it was not as smelly as before. This seemed to silently imply that this new dynasty might face some storms in the future, and it seemed that the gods in the sky felt the establishment of the Baratheon dynasty and took the initiative to send rain to help wash away the dirty silt that once existed in the capital of the Seven Kingdoms. In short, there are all kinds of gossips in the streets, just look at which side you sit on. At this time, the year 283 of the conquest calendar has entered the dust of history. It has been 284 years since the coronation of the new king. There seems to be a storm in the sea east of King's Landing, and even the rain has continued for several days. Afterwards, Grand Maester Pycelle claimed that the storm in the narrow sea in the east might be the biggest storm in the history of Westeros. Then another rumor began to spread: the Storm King usurped the throne and would bring endless storms and rains to the Seven Kingdoms. However, the sky was clear for more than 10 days after the storm, and this rumor gradually disappeared. King Robert took office, and the Seven Kingdoms had to deal with everything that needed to be done, and all the previous promises or decisions needed to be truly implemented at this moment. Territory allocation, courtier adjustment, recruitment, and dispatch of tax collectors from all over the country. Many of the nobles who had gathered in the capital dispersed after the rainstorm stopped and returned to their homes, but there were still people from each family staying in King's Landing, because King Robert would marry Cersei, the daughter of Duke Tywin of the Westerlands, in the near future. The wedding would be very lively and they must not be absent. Amid the busyness in the Red Castle, the intelligence chief Varys delivered a message. In the storm, the royal fleet of the former royal family Targaryen gathered on Dragonstone Island suffered heavy damage and was no longer a concern. Now the defenders of Dragonstone Island are ready to surrender to the new Baratheon dynasty and sincerely hope that the royal army will rush to accept them as soon as possible. So the fleet, which had not yet been fully formed, headed towards Dragonstone Island under the leadership of Stannis Baratheon. Unfortunately, when they arrived at the island, the Targaryen family on the island had already left. This incident made King Robert, who was full of hatred for the dragon remnants, very angry. He even reprimanded his second brother Stannis for his poor performance. The new Prime Minister Jon Arryn, who was watching from the side, also had doubts about this. A while ago, although the rumor was basically attributed to the unwilling mentality of Duke Mace of the River Reach, the confession provided by the captives they captured was not the case. Instead, he mentioned another name. And this name has a clear connection with the current heir of the kingdom in front of him. The prisoner died in prison that night after he gave his name. There were not many clues, and the Tyrell family took the initiative to stand up at that time. In contrast, Duke John was more likely to believe that everything was the Tyrell family's fault, rather than the kingdom's heir Stannis's dirty hands and feet. But despite this, a certain suspicion still remained in his heart, and it would always emerge every now and then, making him ponder. The change of dynasties still seems to be unable to escape the corruption of power. Under the vigorous vitality, there are still undercurrents. I wonder where this troubled Westeros continent will lead. However, one thing happened, which diluted some of the atmosphere in the castle. After sleeping for more than half a month, King Robert's younger brother Renly finally woke up. Chapter 69. Complex dreams continued one after another. Sometimes he was struggling and drowning in the turbulent sea, and sometimes he was engulfed by the flames of a ferocious dragon. The fierce storm tortured the tiny figure on the surface of the sea, and the dragon's fire burned him into a pile of dust. In addition, sea monsters, swimming fish, thunder, rainstorms. Countless scenes came and went, like the tides, repeating and entangled. Immersed in various dreams, Renly's thoughts could not help but drift with him. His thoughts were scattered and could not be condensed, and he didn't know whether he was awake or dreaming. At first, this situation continued to be very serious, but then it gradually subsided. The storm slowly dissipated, the dragon spread its wings and flew away, and finally all the dreams turned into bubbles and dissipated. Renly only felt a darkness emerging, and then the scattered thoughts gradually condensed into shape. His senses were also restored. The surroundings were very quiet, but his sensitive ears could hear a series of trivial noises, including the chirping of birds, the sound of people talking, the sound of mops rubbing against the ground, and naturally the sound of people's footsteps. He had no strength in his body, and his dry lips made him lick them with his tongue. A sour and bitter taste was thus felt in his mouth. The taste seemed familiar, as if it was the residue of some kind of medicine. He slowly opened his eyes, and the familiar ceiling and exquisite bed curtains allowed him to quickly confirm that this was his room. He turned his head slightly and looked around. There was no one here except himself. However, he saw a few shriveled grey-black leeches lying motionlessly on the silver tray on the bedside table, which made Renly, who had just woken up, startled, and his mind immediately became much clearer. He then raised his arm and found that there were indeed some abnormal red and swollen marks on it, but at this time Renly did not pay much attention to this situation, but stared at his skinny arm in a daze. The child's arms were thin to begin with, and the one in front of him, though not skin and bones, looked very thin, totally different from the chubby one he had eaten before. "How long has it been?" The boy, who was deeply trapped in the feather bed, couldn't help but think of this question. Renly didn't remember what happened before he fell asleep. He only remembered that it was the day when his cheap brother was crowned, and then he fell asleep in a daze, and then he had continuous dreams. But now thinking back, those dreams were also hazy and he couldn't remember them. He felt like he had only slept for one night, but the current situation was definitely not the case. Why did this happen? Renly immediately thought of the dragon egg he had eaten before, which had no reaction at first. Thinking of this, he took a deep breath, then barely stood up and leaned against the head of the bed, and his eyes followed to the silver-plated round mirror embedded in the wall opposite the bed. A pale and skinny young face came into view, looking much more haggard than normal, with hair much longer, and bangs clinging to the forehead due to sweat stains, looking wilted. Renly found that his hair seemed to be darker than before, and the color of his eyes was a little different, but the information that emerged immediately made him temporarily abandon these concerns and focus on the attribute bar on the mirror. Racial level, LV2. Profession, Bard. Professional level, Entry level. Professional characteristics, sensitive to rhythm. Knowledge, Heraldry LV7, Swimming LV7, Archery LV5. Knowledge, Poison making LV5, Dagger mastery LV5, Fishing LV2, Horse riding LV2. Derived characteristics, Psychic emblem, Valyrian blood, Mutation, Curse of Embers. The racial level became 2, and swimming inexplicably upgraded to 1 level. There was no change in the others, but the last characteristic made him frown. 2 more, 2 less? No, since swimming has reached level 7, it should also derive a characteristic, which means 3 less. Thinking, his eyes focused on the replaced characteristic. Originally, this was just a subconscious behavior of Renly, but he didn't expect it to have a new change. After focusing his eyes, he saw the original foggy information on the round mirror slowly fade away, and a new line of text reappeared. Valyrian blood, mutation. The weak Valyrian blood in your body has merged the power of curse and derived characteristics. Your physique has been enhanced. You have some mysterious characteristics that come with your blood. You have the ability to survive in the underwater world and illusion mimicry, but it will cause some unnecessary trouble. This sudden explanatory text made Renly stunned for a while, and then he couldn't help but look at another one. Curse of Embers, you have some remnants of curse power hidden in you, which makes you immune to most curse effects, but when you are in the sea, you have a small chance of triggering a storm. Blood awakening, fusion, mutation. Although these things are a bit strange, Renly can still understand them, but the appearance of the curse makes him frown unconsciously. When he was in the dungeon, the strange storm had long made him suspicious, but there was no clue. Now it seems that the storm was obviously not triggered by accident or unintentionally, it was a curse. But the question is, who cursed him? Or, what is it? He was alert, but before he could think carefully, he suddenly heard a trivial noise in his ears. He looked down and saw a black cat walking out from under the bed. At first, it didn't notice that someone was looking at it. It stretched on the light green carpet and yawned, then sat there and began to lick its fleshy front paws. But while licking, its movements suddenly stagnated, and then its head slowly turned to look at the head of the bed. The loud and sharp cat cry seemed to be frightened by something, but it seemed that a cat was expressing joy. With a burst of noise, the guards outside the door hurriedly pushed the door open, and then excited shouts immediately rang out from inside and outside the room. "Hurry, hurry up, Master Renly is awake." The awakening of the king's younger brother caused a stir in the busy Red Castle. The patient regained consciousness, Grand Maester Pycelle hurried over to check on him, and the servants were busy preparing food and nutritional supplements. The atmosphere of joy and relaxation spread in a small circle, and soon after, Renly's two cheap brothers came one after another and stayed with him for a long time. The new king had a generous smile on his face, and his sincere laughter and joyful eyes made people feel more favorable, but Renly could still see a trace of irritability in his eyebrows. And although the second brother Stannis had the same expression on his face, he could also feel some depression and looked a little tired. At first, Renly was still wondering what happened to these two people, but later he heard the servants talking about it, and he knew what happened specifically. The remaining Targaryens on Dragonstone escaped Baratheon's pursuit and now disappeared without a trace. No one knows where they went. The missing people include the former Mad King's Queen Rhaella Targaryen, the Queen's youngest son Viserys Targaryen, and a newborn baby girl whose name is still unknown. Their disappearance is a time bomb for the new and ill-gotten kingdom, and it is no wonder that Robert is troubled by this, but it has another meaning for Renly. "I don't know what the mother of dragons looks like." The black-haired boy thought about it. Isn't she really an eyebrow monster? This possibility seems unlikely, because the person he came into contact with looks completely different from the one in the show he watched, which is normal. It would be strange if they looked the same. But for now, Renly doesn't have much time to think about the mother of dragons who will have a long list of names in the future, because he is not in a good condition at the moment. He seemed to be skinny and weak like an old man, without the spirit of a child. When he just woke up, Renly couldn't even get out of bed normally. After a few days, his body gradually recovered, and he was finally able to walk. This made him feel complicated. It stands to reason that upgrading is a good thing, but it is not very comfortable to have such a special state of feeling that the body is hollowed out. However, as his body gradually recovered, he slowly felt the changes in himself. His strength is much greater than before, his mind seems to be clearer, his memory has been enhanced to a certain extent, and even his skin has gotten rid of the fragility of a child. Although it still looks white and tender, it has a kind of flexibility. Is it improved in all aspects? He understood. The Valyrian blood that emerged is different from what he knew. It seems to have integrated his two previous characteristics about the ocean and a so-called illusion mimicry ability. Unfortunately, Renly did not have the opportunity to jump into the sea for the test, and he didn't know what the specific situation was. However, he tried it once when he was washing his face. The cold feeling still existed, but the stimulation of the cold seemed to be reduced. After spending some time recuperating in Magur's tower, everything in the outside world had nothing to do with him for the time being. However, during a walk in the courtyard, the brown-haired middle-aged Davos came to him and told him something. The white deer Wenda said that she had completed the task you asked her to do, and asked me to find out when you are free to see her. Wenda? At first, Renly was unfamiliar with the name, but then he remembered that it was the female bandit who defected to him, and then he remembered what he had said before he fainted, about the cranberry man and the dagger. So he said to Davos, I can see her tomorrow. Chapter 70. Lu Wenda has always been curious about the child who casually gave her son a gold dragon without asking for anything in return. Is he the naughty child common in aristocratic families? Or a fat boy with big money? Or a kind-hearted and weak boy? Every time she picked up the gold dragon, she would think of this question, and when her companions discussed and decided to give up the dull life in the royal forest and go to the boy, she would always think about it. Now she finally met the person in question, and it felt a little strange. The black velvet coat with silver edges was a little loose to wear, and the same was true for the pants. The boy looked very thin on him. The crowned stag emblem woven with gold thread and black silk on his chest shone brightly in the sunlight outside the window. His face was pale and looked a little weak, as if he had just had a serious illness. I heard that it was true. At first glance, he seemed to be a frail boy, with nothing special except his black hair that made people want to play with it. However, when the boy's beautiful blue eyes looked at her, this impression changed completely. Those were a pair of calm and scrutinizing eyes, giving her a feeling that was completely different from the boy's age, but at this time she was more concerned about the color of these eyes. Amazing ice blue color, magnificent, deep, but not indifferent, but rather a strange attraction. When she was stared at, she felt a comfortable feeling like being blown by a cool sea breeze in the hot summer weather. How did you do it? The slightly hoarse voice of the child interrupted the woman's amazement, so she gathered her thoughts and replied, I observed him for a few days and found that he did not bring any soldiers with him. He only brought a baby and a wet nurse to live in an inn in the city. She paused and saw that the boy was listening attentively, then she said, he was not there on the day King Robert patrolled the city, so I took the opportunity to climb in through the window and secretly took the child away. At first, Wenda was afraid that the child in front of her could not understand what she was saying, so she spoke very slowly, but seeing that the other party was listening calmly, she unconsciously spoke much faster. I left him a note, asking him to bring the ransom to redeem the child, and I asked him to take off all his weapons and armor and go to the place I specified before I would actually show up. But when he went, I actually crawled into the hotel again and took out all the things he left behind. Fortunately, I thought I would have to repeat it several times before I could get it. The blonde woman in the light green cloak said, squatting down and patting the rough wooden box at her feet. It's all here, my lord. She used honorifics unconsciously. At this time, the two were in a soldier's duty room on the edge of the Red Castle. In order to meet this female bandit, Renly forged a family letter from Storm's End in advance. After giving it to Davos, the woman was qualified to pass through the gate of the Red Castle. Then, before the soldiers went to inform the busy King Robert, Renly appeared here appropriately and happened to intercept. Now it was a time when the throne room was busy with political affairs, so Renly was not afraid that Robert would come running after hearing the letter. At the same time, Stannis was not in the Red Castle at the moment, so he could receive the woman in front of him with confidence. When the other party spoke, he had already opened the box. Renly glanced at it and finally saw the target he wanted in the gap between a pile of leather armor belts. He breathed a sigh of relief, but he did not take it out immediately. Instead, he looked at the beautiful woman in front of him and asked, "What's the situation with the baby now?" "I put it back." The other party said, "He is a little annoying, crying and shouting, and he peed on me." Renly understood what she said and roughly understood what kind of character she had. Just like her original identity, she was a female bandit. She was very familiar with things like kidnapping and extortion. She did not show much sadness for the death of her companions, and did not care about breaking the law. She had no scruples about the means and everything was for the purpose of achieving the goal. But she was not just a female bandit. She sounded quite smart. At the same time, it was interesting that normal bandits could not read, but this one could read and write. This was not an ordinary thing. You know, even if they were from noble families, there were many people who could not read. The lord class basically only needed to be able to read and write. The others had maesters, so they didn't need to spend much time studying. And people in this world generally did not like to study, but were happy to wield swords and guns. "Where did you learn to read and write?" Renly asked curiously. The man in front of him looked about 30 years old, tall and slender, squatting there with his golden hair scattered and spread out, looking a little casual, and his appearance could be called very beautiful. "My father is a hedge knight," the other party replied. "He taught me to read and write since I was a child." Brenly nodded when he heard this, and did not ask any more questions, but took off a small grey bag tied around his waist and handed it to the other party. "If you really want to be my retainer, then you will naturally have a fixed salary, but before that you are not one, so this is your reward." He had already spent all his gold dragons, so the bag naturally would not contain gold coins, but it was from Migur's tower, so it was also very valuable. The other party took the bag and opened it, revealing a look of joy. Brenly smiled at this, and then looked at the boy who was pulling the corner of the woman's cloak hood, looking a little nervous. The boy was wearing a brown tunic and tight trousers. He had a delicate appearance and a pair of bright green eyes. He seemed to be about 7 or 8 years old, and his face was neat and tidy. He didn't look as dirty as when he saw him before, nor did he look slovenly like an ordinary civilian child. He had obviously been groomed before coming here. Just facing Renly's gaze, his clean face suddenly turned red, his head was lowered subconsciously, and he looked a little nervous. "Is she a girl?" Renly asked strangely. "Boy." The woman who had put the money bag away stood up and answered, and at the same time reached out and patted her son's brown-haired head. "Tob, call the adults quickly." "Yes, sir." His stumbling words sounded very shy, but at first glance he looked like an honest child. Renly was actually happy with this because he liked honest people. So he said to the woman, "You stay in King's Landing for now. When I leave the Red Keep one day, you can bring your son to follow me. If you need anything, go to Davos first." The Davos he mentioned was not in the room, but chatting with the guards outside to attract attention. The woman nodded after hearing this, and then left with her son wisely. She didn't know much about Renly, she only knew that Davos could contact him, and she was surprised when she was asked to do it later. Originally, she wanted to ask the boy why he had to find a way to get the weapons and equipment from the northern swamp man, but in the end she never asked. She didn't know why, but she always felt a little restrained in front of the child who was younger than her son, as if a commoner were facing a lord with a higher status than herself. However, she is not a commoner, but a female bandit. She used to make a living by bullying and blackmailing noble lords, so this is a bit abnormal. "Maybe you care too much about this opportunity?" she thought to herself. After the Brotherhood of the Kingswood was wiped out, these bandits who were once famous had no choice but to survive with their tails between their legs. Because of their profession, they knew a lot of nobles, and they were even cautious when walking out of the woods, for fear of being recognized. Then he was hanged or beheaded. However, hiding in the woods and raising pigs for a living is really not what these people are willing to do. This boredom reached its peak after an old friend fell ill and had no money for treatment. So when the Golden Dragon arrived, they resolutely embarked on the road to King's Landing. At first, they actually planned to defect to Stannis. After all, there was a precedent of smugglers. Only after they found out the specific situation, they gave up the idea. After some consideration, they looked at the owner of the Golden Dragon, the young master of the Baratheon family. They want to make some money from this kid. Although this idea is not very reliable, having an idea is better than having no idea. The result was very unlucky. Instead of getting any money, 2 of her companions died. Wenda was actually disheartened and decided to go back to the woods to continue raising pigs for a living. As a result, she didn't even die before. The aristocratic young master who posted it suddenly handed over a note and also offered her a generous price. Consider training her son to be a knight. For some people, knights are just being called around and spending money to hire a lot of super soldiers, but for most civilians, becoming a knight is equivalent to reaching the sky in one step, and it may not be possible to work hard for a lifetime. The top position that can be achieved. Although she is not an ordinary commoner, Wenda understands better what this promise means, so even though the other party's words are not certain, and even though the other party is only a 5-year-old child, she still tries her best to complete this matter. The process is an understatement, but only she knows the hardships and dangers involved. Just for the sake of the children, everything is nothing. The contents of the 2 large boxes were carried into Renly's room in Migur's tower by the guards. The boy claimed that these were some old toys and clothes sent to him by Storm's End, and none of the guards doubted this. After some busy work, the room became quiet. Only a black cat came over curiously and circled around. Renly ignored this and immediately opened the box and watched intently. Because he had revealed his curiosity about daggers to the Zedi people, to be on the safe side, he did not tell the female bandit what he really wanted. Therefore, there were many items in the box. Most of them were clothes, as well as leather and mail, but the one Renly was interested in was the wooden-handled dagger hidden in the pile of clothes. He picked up the dagger without hesitation, then turned it over and looked at it in front of his eyes. This dagger looks very ordinary. It has an Anmu handle. The iron body of the dagger shines with a sharp luster under the sunlight coming from the balcony. It has obviously been maintained for a long time. It was just different from before. Sniffing it with his nose at a close distance, Renly suddenly discovered that the smell on the dagger had not really been lost. It was still there, but it had become very weak. Consumed? Or? Thinking thoughtfully, he did not test whether he could enter the copy by holding it tightly at this time, but put it into his trash can. Physical weakness led to mental depression. At this time, he felt that he had no strength, he had not fully recovered, and he really had no intention of embarking on an adventure. So even though the dagger looked unusual at the moment, he didn't dare to really test it, otherwise he would be caught off guard if he jumped in directly. After I get well. This thought flashed through his mind, and Renly turned his head to look at the bowl of fragrant pea and bacon soup on the bedside table. It was the leftover food from breakfast, and Renly did not ask the servants to take it away. After all, eating more can make you get better faster, and he had already decided to make the most of this period of time to be a glutton. Just as Renly was thinking about how to eat in his bedroom to get a more balanced nutrition, a conversation closely related to it was taking place in the king's residence in Magur's tower. I opened the backstage in a daze and suddenly found that a big guy had rewarded a leader, the first leader in my life, ahem, a bit Alexander. Chapter 71. Although they both belong to Magur's tower, the room where the king lives is much more spacious than Renly's. The balcony has a wide view, the floor is covered with gorgeous silver mirror carpets, the golden bed is enough to sleep more than 6 adults, the wine cabinet in the corner is filled with wines shipped from all over the 7 countries, and the furniture and furnishings all reveal the atmosphere. And expensive. The place is very bright, but at this time there are only 2 people sitting on the wine cabinet chair, one old and one young. They seem to be leisurely tasting the sour red wine produced in Dorne, but in fact they are discussing the political affairs of the kingdom. Like the wine in their hands, they were currently talking about Dorne. The newly appointed Prime Minister Jonaran was preparing to wait for the young king in front of him to go to Dorne after his wedding to try to appease the Martell family in Dorne. Robert himself didn't have much hope, but he didn't refuse his adoptive father's offer. However, the topic about Dorne did not continue. After the initial decision, the young black-haired king turned to say, "I intend to make Renly Lord of Storm's End." These words made the bald old man with a ring of pale blonde hair look startled, but the other party's words did not end, but continued. "Look at how pale his little face is. I'm really afraid that he will die of illness like this," Robert said, drinking down the wine in his hand, and then poured himself another glass, looking very interested. Perhaps this news will help him recover faster. Upon hearing this, the old man put the silver wine glass in his hand back on the wine cabinet, and then said seriously, "I don't think it's appropriate, Your Majesty. Renly is too young, and he is frail and sick, and he has not made any merit. Credit." Robert was a little unhappy when he heard this. "To talk about this, do I have to seal our family's castle and territory to others? What I mean is, Your Majesty, you can keep the Storm lands. You are the head of the Baratheon family and have the right to keep your own family property." Old John explained, "Wait until your son is born and then divide it out. This way that's the right choice. I'm not married yet, and you're already thinking about my son." Robert chuckled, "Besides, I can't tell whether it's a child of the Lion family or the Deer family." These words made the other party's face freeze, and then he looked at the young king in front of him with wide eyes, as if he couldn't believe that he could say such words. Robert laughed when he saw this. "Look how scared you are, John. Are you so old that you can't even hear a joke?" As he said this, the smile on his face slowly faded, "But if Cersei really dares to mess with me after marriage, I have to kill her. It doesn't matter whether she is in the West or not. Then don't do it again. What are you talking about the overall situation of the 7 kingdoms? If such a day comes, we should consider how to completely eradicate Lannister." The old man said without hesitation after hearing this, and then showed helplessness. "But how many times do you have to ask me to say that? That's just a rumor, Robert. Thinking about King Aegon, I'm really afraid that you will be misled by words like him and do something stupid. His words were filled with undisguised worry, causing Robert to be silent for a moment, and then he said with emotion, "You are a good adoptive father, John. Sometimes I feel like such a bastard." The old man felt comforted when he heard this, but then he heard the other person say, "But let's not talk about the issue of my brother's enfeoffment. I can only make the decision on this matter. The 7 kingdoms are all mine, but my brother is not even a lord. No? How will I face my parents after I die? The Clinton family has been deprived of all their territory and wealth by the Mad King. Your Majesty can consider granting Falcon's Nest to Renly." The old man suggested, "It doesn't have to be Storm's End. Storm's End is just a castle, but it represents the Baratheon family of the Stormlands, and the Baratheon family of the Stormlands is the lord of most of the lords and nobles of the Stormlands. The name of a lord is very important to the noble class, and it is equivalent to half a master. The other half is the king." Robert's intention was obviously to make his younger brother Renly the Duke of the Stormlands, or to inherit the family fortune of the Stormlands Baratheon family. This was equivalent to directly making a 5-year-old child a prince. "Griffin's Nest Castle is indeed a large territory, but you don't know that I have promised to give out the land of the Clinton family." Robert heard the words and denied, "Even that broken castle, I plan to return it to Rona de Clinton. He fights for me, and I always give him something sweet." "What about the Long Table Hall? The Molly Weiss family was also deprived of its territory by the Mad King, and now we have." "By the gods, John, don't tell me you don't know that's the castle in the Reach. It can also be from the Stormlands." "That's right, but we have already given a piece of land in Long Table Hall to the Dondarrion family. Do we need to give away the castle as well?" Robert shook his head, "The Reach is quite honest now, and I don't want to cause more excitement." "Them." Old John was speechless when he heard this. This man was beaten to a pulp by the Reach army, and even gave the Duke of Tyrell a good beating when he saw him after the war. However, now he seems to have forgotten how much he gritted his teeth when he mentioned that defeat. There was no other reason for such a change. Duke Mace Tyrell had been teasing his sister a while ago, but he didn't know which string he was talking about, which made Robert happy. He was not really a fool. He took the necessary actions to punish the defeated and cut off a large piece of meat from the Reach. However, it seemed that he did not have much hostility towards the Reach. However, this was not a bad thing for a king. After all, he would have to look at the whole country sooner or later. Although the war had changed dynasties, the overall situation in the 7 kingdoms had not changed much. There was not much cake to begin with. Apart from the Targaryen crown, the other 2 hostile camps, the Reach and Dorne, were too far away to reach, and the other was still strong enough to not bite too much. Storm's End was Storm's End. With Robert there, the lords in the Stormlands were unlikely to cause any trouble. The old man thought to himself, and suddenly thought of another question. "Your Majesty, do you want to confer Stannis to Dragonstone? He is my heir." Robert said, "As a matter of course, the king's heir should of course be conferred on Dragonstone. Dragonstone is located in the ocean east of King's Landing, separated from the port of King's Landing by a bay called Blackwater Bay. It is not a large place, but it has a special status. Since its establishment, the Targaryen dynasty has always conferred the heir to the Iron Throne as the Prince of Dragonstone, which has continued for nearly 300 years. It has become a custom and tradition tacitly accepted by all lords. It can even be said that as long as he is conferred on Dragonstone, it is equivalent to announcing the heir. However, at this moment, it is difficult for Lord John to treat his adopted son's second brother with a normal attitude. Because when he mentions him, it is difficult for the old man not to think of some things that were found out by the rumor a while ago. Although everyone has determined that the incident was caused by Lord Tyrell of the River Reach, is it really the case? What if it was not actually done by Tyrell, or he was also used by someone? If the rumor was that the king's second brother Stannis had ordered his knights. If that was the case, what was his purpose? Duke John could not help but think of the era when the dragons of the Targaryen dynasty had not yet become extinct, and a dissolute prince who was also the king's younger brother and once coveted the position of the Prince of Dragonstone, full of ambition and unruly. This thought made the new Prime Minister alert, so facing the young king in front of him, he said, "Stannis is your heir now, but it does not mean that he will always be in the future." His words made Robert's face startled. "You can't never have your own son as an heir." Seeing this, the old man said again, so I think your majesty should keep Dragonstone and wait for the day when the heir is born before distributing it. This is not in line with tradition. Robert answered smoothly. The tradition is that the king's heir is the Prince of Dragonstone. The old man said slowly, but Stannis is destined not to be your heir, unless you can't give birth to a son. This made Robert think for a moment, and then nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense, but then, according to the order of succession and military merit, Stannis should be sealed in Storm's End. The king's words made the old man frown, but before he could say anything, the other party suddenly cursed. Damn it, why should we abide by the traditions of the Targaryen family? That is the rule set by a group of silver-haired bastards, why should I listen to them? Your Majesty, you inherit the Iron Throne in the name of Princess Liliai Targaryen's bloodline, so you naturally need to abide by the past traditions. That was before I was crowned. Robert said, now I am the king, who can oppose me because of such a small matter? The old man's eyelids jumped when he heard this, and he had a bad premonition. What do you mean, Your Majesty? Of course it is to overthrow it. Robert answered as a matter of course. Chapter 72. Renly didn't know that his sickness had given Robert the idea of canonizing him in advance, and he never thought that some of his actions would inadvertently lead to some wonderful changes in the future. He was cultivating and recuperating in the Red Castle. He ate and drank a lot every day. When he felt like it, he would go out to walk with his cat, and if not, he would practice various musical instruments. At this time, his physique is much stronger than before, his lung capacity is more, and his skin is more flexible. Things that he could not practice for a long time will basically not have any obstacles now. Living leisurely in this royal castle all day long, eating well, drinking well and sleeping well, although Renly still looked thin, he was actually not like that, and his appearance of thinness was also getting better day by day. There were no twists and turns or new accidents, and no one paid much attention to this little kid. He lived a peaceful life. But while attending a dinner party at the Red Fort, an unexpected person approached him. During the banquet, harp and flute tunes were playing. Some elegantly dressed noblemen and women were dancing to the music in the center of the hall. A tall young man with smooth brown curly hair took advantage of Renly hiding in the corner and stuffed it into his mouth. The strawberry cake effort found him. Hello, kid. He greeted with a smile, holding a silver wine glass inlaid with rubies in his hand, from which a slight aroma of wine faintly emanated. Looking up at the big man who took the initiative to talk to him, Renly swallowed the food in his mouth, slowly took out the white handkerchief in his lining and wiped his hands and mouth, and then stood up politely. Respond. Good evening, Lord Tyrell. The boy behaved politely, but the other party unobtrusively pulled out a chair under the long table and sat across from Renly. Then he asked with concern, Gods have mercy, child, how is your health? It's much better now. Thank you for your concern, sir. Renly replied with a smile, and his eyes seemed to bend a little. The other party was stunned for a moment, and then he couldn't help but sigh, your eyes are so beautiful, my child. People become envious when they see it. I also envy you, sir, for being so tall. The boy said sincerely, it would be great if I could be this tall when I grow up. He couldn't think of any other words of flattery for the moment, so he had to use this as an excuse, but the other party didn't have the ability to read minds, so he burst out laughing after hearing this. Your father is very tall, and your brother is not shorter than me. I guess you won't be shorter when you grow up. Then I hope everything you said will come true. The boy replied seriously, making the other party laugh again. A middle-aged attendant following him couldn't help shaking his head and laughing. You must go to Highgarden as a guest if you have the chance, Renly. After suppressing his smile, Duke Tyrell said intentionally or unintentionally, I have 3 sons and a daughter, as well as a group of nephews and nieces. You will not be lacking when you get there. Playmates. It depends on what my elder brother says. The boy replied, but I look forward to your invitation, my lord. I hear the apples in Highgarden are very sweet. It's not just the apples that are sweet, the Duke said with a smile. After some more small talk, Renly pretended to use the bathroom and got rid of the Duke of the Reach, who he thought was a bit stupid. The other party's impression was the opposite. He looked at the boys retreating back with admiration. The smile on his face gradually dissipated after a long time. Then the Duke and the butler who followed him said, Look, what an interesting little guy. I intend to take him as a servant. The butler was a middle-aged man in his 40s and came from a knight family. He frowned when he heard this. Forgive me for talking, my lord, but His Majesty Robert will not agree to your proposal. He will think that we are asking for hostages. What right does a loser have to ask for hostages? The Duke chuckled when he heard this. I just want to get closer to each other and come to King's Landing. Although I am here to kneel down and surrender, we can't just run back in despair, right? His Majesty Robert would not think so. I don't think your Majesty will be overly concerned. The Duke said, Renly is just his third brother, not his son, and even if he is of value as a hostage, he is not worth much. I think your Majesty should be able to understand this. Doesn't he see it? After all, my little sister can appreciate Highgarden's training of children. Old Town is my jurisdiction. Who in the Seven Kingdoms can compare with Tyrell? After several contacts, he became more familiar with Robert, and his words also showed a familiarity and a trace of imperceptible resentment. It's just that the housekeeper is not as optimistic as this one. That child is not too important, sir, but it cannot be given casually to serve as a squire to the former enemy. Former enemies. Duke Tyrell was displeased with these remarks, but he did not refute anything. After thinking about it, he said, if His Majesty Robert is really not accurate, then I will give Renly a son as a playmate in the future. Okay. Let me think about it. Although Loras was only born less than 2 years ago, he is quite suitable. It doesn't matter if he has to wait a few more years until Renly leaves the Red Keep. You are so confident about Baratheon, why don't you mention sending your son to King Robert as a squire? The butler secretly slandered him, and replied on the surface, the premise is that Renly will be named a lord in the future. Of course he will be made a lord. The Duke said matter-of-factly, His Majesty Robert is famous for his generosity. As he said this, he looked at his housekeeper and asked with interest. Where do you think he will be sealed in the future? Is it likely that he will be in the Stormland? Not much hope, my lord. The steward replied rationally, I think there is a high chance that Stannis will be sealed off from the Stormlands. Stannis. The name made the Duke feel uncomfortable. They besieged Storm's End Castle for a year. Although they didn't cause any casualties, they almost forced them to eat corpses. Moreover, Stannis is mean and stubborn. This kind of person is the most vengeful. That's okay, Stannis's fiancée is from the Florentine family, and the Florentine family is a long-established noble family in the Reach. They have never obeyed Tyrell's orders. They always claim that their bloodline is other than that of the Reacher. The family is closer to the ancient Riverbend royal family that was destroyed by dragon flames, and is more orthodox than the Tyrell family, who was born as a butler. The Stormlands and the Reach are close to each other. If Stannis was really sealed to the Stormlands, I think he'll be banished to Dragonstone. Duke Tyrell unconsciously sipped the red wine in the silver cup in his hand, and then said, according to the order of succession, he is the heir of His Majesty Robert, and he should be sealed on Dragonstone. But I will not always be His Majesty's heir. The butler did not notice that his Lord Duke had any abnormalities in his heart. After hearing this, he analyzed thoughtfully, His Majesty Robert has an illegitimate daughter in the Vale, which is enough to prove that he can give birth to an heir. And Stannis defended Storm's End, and he was very concerned about it. This is a great achievement for your Majesty. If you don't consider the succession to the throne, Dragonstone would be too shabby. We are the ones giving great merit. The Duke looked at the man in front of him with some displeasure upon hearing this. Do you really want Stannis to be banished to the Stormlands? He secretly considered whether it was time for him to change his housekeeper. He really can't speak. The conversation there was not very pleasant, but here Renly pretended to go out and wander around, and then returned to the banquet hall, his eyes scanned, and finally he looked at a little dwarf who was hiding in the corner of the banquet and tearing greasy chicken legs. The man was facing Renly sideways, so he could see his protruding forehead and ear-length golden hair. He was wearing a crimson velvet tights and loose trousers. His legs were thick and short, and he could only hang in the air when he sat on the chair. Swinging, almost like a child. But he was indeed a child. Renly felt that this man was about the same age as himself. After thinking about it, he stepped forward. The man in front of me is named Tyrion Lannister. The reason for this dinner is to welcome the future queen of the Lannister family to King's Landing tonight. Renly had already seen the Light of the West before, and he had to say that he was indeed very beautiful. But aside from future-related matters, he was actually more curious about the existence of the nicknamed Little Devil in front of him. The other party came with his sister and was preparing to attend the wedding soon. He just might be a little sensitive to the surrounding environment. Before Renly could get closer, the child in the corner turned his head and looked at him, revealing an ugly and immature cheek. "Are you here to laugh at me too?" he asked, his eyes one black and one green showing disgust. Chapter 73. Are you here to laugh at me too? Renly was stunned by the words that came his way. He then pulled out the chair opposite him and sat on it. At the same time, he said, "I don't have the habit of laughing at others. I don't have the habit of talking to strangers." The child sitting on the chair looked at Renly coldly with his colored eyes, as if his tangled facial features looked very hideous and ugly in the dim light. Very lonely. Renly thought to himself, but didn't take it seriously. The old god was sitting there on the ground. When he stretched his arms forward, his sleeves flickered, and a shining silver dagger suddenly slipped out and was held in his hand. Then his upper body was slightly raised, and he held it in his hand. While the other party stared blankly, he deftly used a dagger to cut off a piece of chicken wing from the plate of roasted chicken in front of him. Under the light of a nearby brazier, a piece of chicken wing that looked tender and greasy was thrust away from Tyrion's eyes with a dagger, and at the same time, he heard a sentence. "I think your chicken is delicious, so I came to you to ask for a portion." As the black-haired boy opposite said, he tore off a piece of the chicken wing he put back in his hand with his mouth, and his voice was muffled while chewing. "But you don't seem to be willing, so I can only use force." This sounded like bullying, but after the other person scratched his forehead, he instead pushed the plate of roast chicken in front of him to Renly. "It's for you, but I don't think this chicken is very delicious." His voice was hoarse, and it was also filled with the childishness unique to a boy. Renly estimated that this chicken was only 8 or 9 years old now. "Really?" he asked as he cut off another piece of chicken leg meat and put it into his mouth to chew. "Then why do you eat so deliciously?" "I'm very hungry," the other person replied. That seemed to be the case, but Renly felt that his tone was somewhat forced. At the same time, while speaking, his eyes unconsciously glanced at a group of children of the same age not far away, who were now playing with each other. Thinking of what he said at the beginning, Renly could easily guess what had happened before, but he had no intention of pursuing the matter and instead changed the subject. "Your name is Tyrion?" "My name is Renly." "I know your name is Renly." Perhaps it was the action just now that made him feel relieved. The future protagonist no longer had the same vigilance as before when he spoke, but he didn't appear too enthusiastic either. "The housekeeper told me in Casterly Rock City. My sister also brought you a gift." These words made Renly couldn't help but turn his head and look around. Through the endless crowd, he could see that his cheap brother Robert was dancing with an elegant girl with blonde hair and slightly curly skirt. Because it was too far away and there were too many people to see her face clearly, but Renly had seen her before, and even if he hadn't seen her before, he could still recognize who it was. Cersei Lannister is currently a well-known person in King's Landing, and she is also the person Renly splashed a lot of dirty water on. There is a very obvious difference between her appearance and the one in my memory, but I am not sure whether she likes fake smiles or not. Thinking about it, Renly looked away and looked at the little dwarf in front of him who was about the same height as him. "I'm looking forward to your sister's gift," he said, "but forget it if it's a toy. I have 2 big boxes." The other party shook his head, indicating that he was unclear, and obviously had no interest in it. Seeing this, Renly changed the subject. "I heard Casterly Rock was built on a large rock. A boulder bigger than a mountain." The little dwarf nodded when he heard this and replied politely, "It's very close to the sea, a bit like here, but much higher than here." "Can you hear the waves too?" "Of course, when the tide comes in, it's like thunder." "Why is it like thunder?" "It sounds like thunder when you run underground. James and I always go to the Hall of Heroes to play, so we can always hear it." "Hall of Heroes? That's from our family." This guy started talking about Casterly Rock a lot, but his words couldn't be said to be very humorous. He was strict and full of the upbringing of a noble family, which was completely different from Renly's impression. However, it is normal that the person in front of him is still too young and his personality has not yet been formed. Renly did not pay much attention to it, but kept providing topics of conversation in a nonchalant manner, allowing the other person to keep talking. Until finally, he felt that it was almost done, and then he said, "I want to invite you to visit King's Landing, Tyrion. There is nothing interesting in the Red Keep, and it is far worse than your home. I heard that there is a dragon in the Red Castle." The other party asked hurriedly when he heard this, with a look of expectation on his ugly face. "It's just a pile of dragon bones." They've all been put away. It's not interesting. Renly replied, seeing the disappointment on the other person's face, and added, but there is an abandoned dragon's lair on Rennis Hills, a place where Targaryen used to raise dragons. I have always wanted to visit it. How about it? Do you want to come with me? The other party was a little moved when he heard the words, but he hesitated. I have to ask my father if he agrees. He doesn't want me to run around. Then I'll ask my eldest brother. He is the king. If he agrees, you will have to give in even if your father doesn't let you run around. Renly said, seeing that the other party had no objection, he slid off the chair and walked towards the center of the hall. The little devil that interested him in his memory was just a lonely and marginalized little dwarf at this time. In fact, he had nothing to talk about, but this matter involved the issue of leaving the Red Castle, so of course he had to pay attention. As a 5-year-old child, even with the protection of guards, it is difficult for him to walk out of the Red Castle, but if there are playmates from afar, and then do something to enhance the relationship between the two families, this possibility is almost possible. The twins of the Redwine family who came a while ago can actually be used as playmates, but Renly heard that they were sent as hostages and could not walk around casually, so he had to give up. He had to seize the opportunity now. Renly was well aware. He ran to the young king who had just finished dancing and was sitting in a chair drinking in the center of the hall and told him about this. He did not get any objection. Instead, the king laughed loudly because of this. The blonde girl beside him also smiled at him with a gentle and virtuous face. But just as Renly got consent and was about to turn around and leave, what happened next was really a bit beyond his expectations. After drinking the crimson wine in the silver goblet, the young king with a golden crown and short charcoal black hair suddenly stood up and clapped his hands. The men and women who seemed to be busy with their own things but were actually paying close attention to this play stopped their actions and slowly gathered around. The singers' performances and the acrobats' performances also stopped, and the wide banquet hall soon became silent. The young king then walked to Renly, with a serious face, lowered his head and looked down at the boy and gave an order. Kneel down. Renly was stunned when he heard the words, feeling a little puzzled, but he still knelt on one knee honestly, and the other raised his hand and placed it on his head. Renly of the Baratheon family, are you willing to serve the kingdom loyally and swear never to betray? The solemn voice came from above, making Renly, who was bowing his head, understand instantly, and then his thoughts were confused. However, his inner emotions did not make him hesitate to react. I swear. The boy's clear words echoed in the banquet hall, and the faces of the noble men and women gathered around him also became formal. Are you willing to protect the kingdom's territory, defend the royal family, and swear to resist all invading enemies? I swear. Are you willing to uphold the laws of one side, protect the people of the territory, and swear to use swords and scales to uphold justice? I swear. King Robert nodded, and then announced loudly. Then, in the name of Robert I of the Baratheon family, King of the Andals, Rhoynar, and the First Men, ruler of the 7 kingdoms and protector of the realm, I hereby appoint Renly of the Baratheon family, my youngest brother, as the Duke of Dragonstone. After the voice fell, Renly was stunned, and the quiet banquet hall was instantly in an uproar. Chapter 74. Obviously, Robert was not acting on impulse. After a brief oath, he even ordered his servants to bring the parchment document that had been prepared long ago and stamp it on the spot, so Renly's appointment took effect. The nobles at the banquet witnessed all this and were initially quite surprised, because Dragonstone had always been the fief of the crown prince, but then they quickly thought of the title bestowed by the king, and then realized his real purpose. In front of all the nobles, he made his third brother the Duke of Dragonstone, and skipped the current heir Stannis. The purpose was naturally not to appoint an heir beyond the inheritance rules that had been passed down for thousands of years, but to express the king's attitude of breaking the old tradition. Although this thought was quite surprising, it was much easier to accept than the king appointing his younger brother as the heir. So applause and congratulations quickly filled the banquet hall. No matter what they thought about it in their hearts, these nobles looked sincere and blessed. This obviously disrupted Renly's original purpose. He ran forward with a lot of careful thoughts and pretended to be so, but he ended up taking back the Lord's appointment document in a daze. After thinking for a long time, he still couldn't figure out why he was appointed to Dragonstone. Shouldn't it be the Stormlands? The plot in his memory seemed to have completely changed. Then, King Robert appointed Stannis Baratheon as the Duke of Stormlands and the Minister of the Royal Navy, so there was another round of chaos. During the ceremony, Renly found that the Duke Tyrell, who had been talking to him with a smile before, turned away with a gloomy face. He thought of something, but felt that it had nothing to do with him, so he didn't care much. Then King Robert announced that he and Cersei of the Lannister family would hold a wedding in 6 days, and formally invited everyone present to attend. So in the midst of cheers, the turbulent banquet was declared over. The black-haired boy returned to the bedroom of Maegor's tower with a confused mind, and soon fell asleep. What changes have occurred after becoming a duke? After the dinner, Renly thought about this question carefully. He has his own territory, an island at the end of Blackwater Bay in the east of King's Landing. He has never seen it, but he heard that it is not very big and there is a volcano on it. It is said that steam is still spewing out from time to time. It may suddenly erupt and engulf the island one day. He has his own castle, a strange castle that is said to be built by the Dragon Kings of the ancient Valyria Free Fortress with magic and dragon fire. It is said that the appearance is very unique and completely different from other castles in Westeros. He also has several vassals. They had been loyal to the Targaryen family before, but the surviving Targaryens on Dragonstone fled after their fleet was destroyed by the storm, so they surrendered to Baratheon. At present, the few vassals are also in King's Landing. Early in the morning of the second day after the enthronement, they ran to Renly to pay a visit and kneel down to swear allegiance. It seems that there is nothing rebellious. In addition, he also has the right to design his own coat of arms, because after the canonization, he is equivalent to leaving the Baratheon family of Storm's End and semi-independent. Renly has no idea about the coat of arms, so he decided to temporarily use the current crown stag without making any changes. Originally, he thought that since he was canonized, he might go to Dragonstone, a narrow but mysterious place, to guard after the wedding, and he was a little worried about whether the curse he carried would take effect. Although the so-called curse has been swallowed by the blood and only the remnants are left, it is still clearly written on it that there is a small chance of attracting a storm. However, he was then notified that he would continue to stay in the Red Castle, and everything on Dragonstone would be managed by the royal family instead, and he would take office after 2 years when he was a little older. In other words, the current canonization is just a name for him. This may be to take care of his weak and sickly body, or there may be other reasons. In short, when all the storms calmed down, Renly found that his life actually didn't change much. Except that people started calling him Sir. Make way! Make way for Lord Renly! The guards on horseback kept shouting, and the footsteps of the tall horses stomped on the narrow road. A group of plainly dressed civilian women hurriedly moved their positions with the clothes hanging in front of their doors, and responded to the sudden noble team with annoyed eyes. There were 3-story earth and brick buildings on both sides of the road. The ground underfoot was uneven after the mud dried. A little further ahead was a narrow path leading to a deserted hill. 4 guards followed the carriage in front and behind, staring at the surroundings vigilantly. Renly in the carriage did not pay attention to the commotion outside. Now he was sitting there peeling apples with some boredom. The dagger in his hand was sharp and dexterous. He saw strips of apple peel being peeled off in rotation, and finally stretched to more than half a meter long. It was the 3rd day since Renly was canonized. He successfully left the gate of the Red Castle and was heading towards the target location. But he was the only boy in the carriage. Renly originally intended to take the Lannister devil with him, but he didn't know what had happened. He had already agreed to something during the banquet, but he suddenly changed his mind. Now he is hiding in the Red Castle, reading a book and not planning to go out. This doesn't affect anything, because after becoming a duke, Renly has a certain degree of freedom, and being able to leave the castle now is proof of that. As the carriage continued to move forward, the surrounding cars swayed along with the uneven road, and the creaking sound of the rolling wheels was heard continuously. The stench that could be smelled in the nose was gradually replaced by a special smell. Finally, when the carriage stopped in the narrow by the time the trail ended, the smell was very noticeable. Further ahead is a staircase road that continues to spread to the top of the hill. After chewing the apple, he throws away the core. Under the guard of the guards, the black-haired boy steps towards the top of the hill called Rennis. Renly came here to collect the copy medium that he had discovered when he first entered the city. The media is on this hill. As they continued to move forward, the sloping stairs were forgotten, and the group finally stepped onto a flat, deserted square. At the end of the square is a towering ruined dome building. Looking back, you can see densely packed cocky buildings standing together under the hills, like bulging hills. Further away, 2 other hills can be seen towering, one of which is where the Cathedral of St. Bell of the King is built, and the other is where the Red Castle stands. Aegon's High Hills, Visenya's Hills, Rhaenys' Hills. They are iconic locations in King's Landing. Aegon the Conqueror once officially landed on the continent of Westeros on this coast where King's Landing is located, and the 3 natural hills on the edge of the coast are also named after him and his sisters. Nowadays, despite the changes in the sea, the hills still exist, but they have long since changed. This is actually not very suitable for building a garden. After glancing at the top of the empty hills, Renly muttered, and then followed the wafting smell and walked towards the ruined dragon cave ahead. The domed building called Dragon's Den is huge, but it has been abandoned for a long time. The exterior is scorched black, covered with cobwebs and dust. It is closed by a bronze door, but there is a broken hole not far from the door that allows people to have no hindrance. Leads to the interior of the building. After stepping in and wandering around the ruins, Renly confirmed that the smell did not come from the surface of the dragon's lair here, but from beneath the dragon's lair. Therefore, he kept searching with his nose twitching, and finally walked to the abandoned wall of the dragon's lair, looking at the dusty wooden floor under his feet. "What are you looking for, sir?" Seeing him stop, one of the guards who had been following him couldn't help but ask. They had been observing the boy Duke for a long time and found that he did not seem to be just hanging out. "There's something hidden down here," Renly answered, calling him forward. The plank was finally forced apart by the guard's long sword, and a dark underground passage came into view. Except for Renly, everyone else was shocked by this, but seeing Renly walking in first, he followed in without hesitation. After entering the passage, the smell became stronger in Renly's nose, and those behind him stared at the surroundings vigilantly, prepared for any accident. However, there were no surprises. When they walked through the passage and came to a gloomy and dark cellar, all they saw were rows of wooden shelves holding dusty earthen jars. Renly looked at the wooden shelves strangely, but he didn't pay much attention to it. Instead, he followed the smell and walked deeper into the cellar. The 2 guards followed him, and the others looked at this hidden place curiously. Suspecting it might be some sort of treasure trove. "What is this?" A guard held a torch and looked closely at the earthen jars on the shelf. After looking at them for a long time, he could not see any obvious signs on these sealed jars. Therefore, he picked up one of the cans and planned to open it, but as soon as he made a move, another local guard who ran in behind him hesitantly spoke. "These appear to be wildfires." After the words fell, the guard who picked up the can couldn't help but froze. The black-haired boy who had just picked up something not far away couldn't help but look back at the row of things that he had originally regarded as trash. After glancing at the rows of earthen jars and the guard on the wooden shelf, I broke out in a cold sweat. Chapter 75. Wildfire is a special flame made by alchemists. It is a flame that is difficult to extinguish after being ignited. It can penetrate into clothes, wood, leather, steel, and even burn when floating on water. In the modern history of Westeros, wildfires have occupied a lot of place. The former Mad King Aerys was obsessed with wildfires and loved to burn people with wildfires. The mediocre King Aegon, whom Renly used not long ago, also had a wishful thinking of creating a war machine that spewed wildfire to attack Dorne. As a result, it exploded as soon as it was transported to the Kingswood, burning a large piece of the forest. More than 50 years ago, an heir to the Targaryen throne frantically drank a jar of wildfire, thinking he could turn into a dragon. The results speak for themselves. It can be said that the existence of this flame has always affected the Targaryen family and even changed their destiny. In addition, Renly also remembered that the future Queen Cersei used wildfire to blow up St. Baelor's Cathedral in King's Landing in that show, which was extremely powerful. Of course, this is a very nonsense thing. After reading the real history of Westeros and understanding the situation in various parts of the Seven Kingdoms, Renly felt that this kind of thing was impossible to happen, or even if it happened, it would definitely affect the entire continent. Situation, instead of just pretending it's gone after the explosion. All in all, he knew a lot about wildfires. This kind of flame is very deadly. A tiny spark or even a slightly higher temperature can cause them to ignite and explode. However, the torch that was guarded just now has even been attached to the surface of the jar containing wildfire. The crisis closest to real death happened so quietly, leaving Renly with lingering fears. Although he has died several times, he has not lived enough. He feels that his current body may not be able to survive if he dies. He hurriedly led the guards out of the cellar passage, and then hurriedly went down the hills and got back into the carriage. Only after the carriage was far away from the Rhaenys Hills and entered a wider road, he breathed a sigh of relief and made a decision. Wildfires must be reported, otherwise an explosion might set the entire King's Landing on fire one day, so don't be careless. Then, touching something in his arms, Renly secretly thought about whether he would use it tonight. No one can guarantee whether this is correct, Your Majesty, but I think you'd better consider it carefully. I have thought about it, John. Making Stannis the Warden of the Stormlands makes Duke Mace very nervous. He hopes that I can trust him, and I also hope that he can be worthy of my trust, so I agreed to his offer. If he wants you to give him trust, then why doesn't he send his son to you as an attendant? Even if he is reluctant to part with his heir, he still has a second son or even a younger son. Isn't this issue already discussed? John, I insisted on taking hostages at the beginning, and you couldn't go too far. In the end, we only wanted those 2 idiots from the Redwyne family. Now we have to give him hostages. Hostage? Don't say that. Renly is just a bridge to ease the relationship. I don't want to send him to be a hostage. 7 hells, John, do you think there is still any possibility of betrayal in the Reach? If those people still have this kind of mentality, wouldn't it be impossible for me to marry Cersei? The conversation in the room was interrupted by a hurried knock on the door, and then a young attendant pushed the door in with King Robert's consent, and then hurriedly reported, Your Majesty, Lord Hand, Lord Renly found in the dragon's lair. A wildfire. The word wildfire made the 2 of them stunned. After looking at each other, the Prime Minister Jonaran immediately asked, How many are there? About 300 cans, the attendant replied. The Prime Minister heard this and said to Robert, Your Majesty, we should immediately send people to seal off Rhenus Hills, and then call the fire warlocks for help to clean up those things. King Robert nodded solemnly, and the newly appointed Prime Minister hurriedly left the room and went out to give orders. This matter can be big or small. In normal times, if you find a wildfire, just send some people to deal with it, but at the moment, King's Landing is full of nobles from all over the 7 kingdoms. If something unexpected happens, it will be a lot of fun. Well, there is no room for the 2 of them not to take it seriously. Rhenus Hills was sealed off all morning that day, and the contents inside were basically cleared. However, the discussion on this matter did not stop, and even continued to deepen. Why is there wildfire hidden in the long-abandoned dragon's lair? This issue was put before the King's Royal Council. Just a wildfire is nothing, but the problem is that some soldiers reported that judging from the traces of the cellar where the wildfire was hidden, those things were not hidden by a certain king in history, but were transported in not long ago. This discovery immediately attracted the attention of the imperial ministers. What happened not long ago? Anyone in Junlin can answer this question. Naturally, the war between Targaryen and Baratheon. During the war, a large number of wildfires were buried deep in the dragon's lair. What was the purpose? Who buried these things? The truth was easily guessed. As we all know, Mad King Aerys places great trust in those sneaky pyromancers, and only they can create wildfire. At the royal conference table, Archmaester Pycelle raised his hand to wipe the non-existent cold sweat on his forehead, and said tremblingly to King Robert, Your Majesty, I think there are more wildfires in the city. I mean, if Crazy the King once wanted to use wildfire to deal with you, then these things should not be just in the dragon's lair, they may be all over the city. Gods bless you, what a crazy idea. What he said was nonsense. Everyone present thought of this issue and felt that the possibility was not small. After all, since the order to bury the wildfire had been issued, we couldn't just bury it in one place, right? What about others? Why didn't it break out? Was it because we didn't have time? Or are there still people lurking in the dark, ready to ignite those horrible things at any time? All kinds of thoughts made King Robert and Prime Minister Jonaran look gloomy. Captain Barristan of the King's Guard gritted his teeth and clenched the hilt of the long sword hanging at his waist. He didn't know what he was thinking. Stannis, the Lord of the Sea, turned his gaze. He looked across the table at the intelligence chief, Wallace, who was wearing a pink robe. His eyes were full of suspicion, making the other party secretly complain. But no matter what they thought, the proposal to thoroughly search the entire King's Landing was quickly implemented, and as expected, locations hiding wildfires were discovered one after another. Flea Bottom, Flower Street, Cobbler's Square, even under St. Belle's Cathedral. The various discoveries made during the continuous searches made the nobles in the city break into cold sweats after receiving the news. They felt that they were completely on top of a volcano that could erupt at any time, and they had no idea about it before. So the madness of the former King Ares once again became a topic of discussion among people in King's Landing, and everyone was happy about this. Then, someone discovered something special. I remember correctly, that kid discovered the secret passage in the Red Keep in the first place. During the Lannister family meeting, Duke Tywin's second brother, Kevin Lannister, said thoughtfully, for no reason. Why did he run to the dragon's lair? This question is equivalent to asking what the children are thinking about all day long. Gillian Lannister, the other brother of the Duke, laughed after hearing this. Besides, the secret passage belongs to the two children of the Redwyn family. We also discussed this matter, second brother, have you forgotten? It's you who forgot. Kevin glanced at his younger brother. It was the secret passage that the child fell into first. Don't ignore this. So? What does this prove? A special boy who is good at discovering secrets? Or is he an unlucky boy who always encounters unlucky things? Gillian, who had brilliant blonde hair, sneered, are you too sensitive, Kevin? Tyrion told me that the child once invited him to play in the dragon's lair. Seeing that the second brother opened his mouth and wanted to say something else, the first Duke Tywin said, so there is nothing to discuss about this matter. We have this time, we should consider Tyrell's problem. His face looked gloomy when he said this. In fact, the Duke of the Lannister family had not been in a happy mood since the day of the king's coronation. Tyrell. The Duke's two younger brothers looked at each other in confusion. We can't do anything to him now, can we, brother? The last brother, Tyget, who was quite silent, said, with an equally ugly expression. He was the one who had excrement splashed on his face at the beginning, but even after the intensive search, he was still alive. He killed several people, but he still couldn't understand his hatred. To be exact, I don't have a clue right now. Lord Tywin said, but Lannister must pay his debts. Renly didn't know what kind of consequences his trip to the dragon's lair would lead to, and how many things would change in the future. He didn't know that something he had done before was still not completely over, and there were even undercurrents. He didn't have the time to think about these things. At this moment, Renly was thinking about himself, because the next morning after returning from the dragon's lair, he learned something. After the king's wedding, he will go to the Reach with that Tyrell Duke. Highgarden is the most beautiful castle in the Seven Kingdoms. Renly, you will definitely like it there, and the climate in the Reach is good, which is also good for your health. As he spoke, Robert squatted in front of the boy and patted his arm, and said seriously, when we get there, give me some food to make you stronger. You are so thin, what will you do if you get a wife in the future? This news was a bit unexpected for Renly. Although he knew that it was common among the nobles in Westeros to send their children to other families to serve as servants, and even though someone had invited him 2 days ago, I was caught off guard and didn't understand why. Am I going to be a cupbearer? For that Duke of Metz? He asked hesitantly. You can only be a steward after you reach a certain age, because the career of a steward needs to be mixed with some night training, which is not feasible at his current age. Bartender. Robert laughed loudly after hearing this. You are now a lord, how can you still be a cupbearer serving people? Then what do I mean? Just a guest. You go and be an adopted son. King Robert replied, adopted to Lady Olenna Tyrell. Renly was stunned again when he heard this. Olenna Tyrell, also known as Olenna Redwine, is the widow of the late old Duke of the River Bend, the mother of the current Duke Tyrell, and the grandmother of some of the main characters in the Tyrell family in memory. Nicknamed Queen of Thorns. Chapter 76. That day, Renly not only learned that he would soon be sent to the Reach to be an adopted son, but he also met Lord Tyrell, who returned to greet him with a smile on his face. Come to think of it, that person seems quite satisfied with having a younger brother now. It is understandable if you think about it. Adopted children in this world have no inheritance rights. Except for some special circumstances, it is mostly a diplomatic means for nobles to send their children to each other as adopted children, allowing the other party to raise and teach them on their behalf, thereby bringing them closer to each other. In fact, the child belongs to whose family it belongs. My cheap eldest brother was sent to the valley as an adopted son in his early years. Now his adoptive father is the Prime Minister and can be regarded as his right-hand man. However, Renly thought that the situation he faced was a little different from Robert's, but he didn't have much opinion on it, or even if he did, he couldn't do anything about it. When he found out about it, he had already made up his mind. Down. His mind was a little confused, but it didn't affect what he was going to do next. 2 days later was the day of Robert's wedding. At this moment, the servants in the Red Keep were all busy and dizzy. This situation seemed to be just right for Renly, so after returning to the bedroom, he took it from his lining pocket. He took out the medium he found in the dragon's lair. It was a broken wooden sword handle, about the same length as his palm, with burnt edges, as if it had been baptized by fire. On the surface of the handle, a grey 7-pointed star pattern was vaguely visible, silently revealing the original identity of the sword handle. Renly had some guesses about this, and took out the dagger he had harvested before and pinched it. Nothing happened, so he made a decision. However, he did not grasp the handle immediately. Instead, he made a special trip out and ran to the tower where Archmaester Pycelle was located and turned out a few books. It is worth mentioning that Pycelle, the Grand Maester of the Red Keep, is currently very reluctant to contact Renly. This is not only because of the initial treatment, but also the subsequent recovery after a long coma. Every time he went for treatment, the child would question his medical skills or ask questions. After several times, he felt that this child was so annoying. But as the king's younger brother and the Duke of Dragonstone, the Grand Maester couldn't treat him like an ordinary naughty kid, so he could only pull himself together and speak politely. "My lord, if you want to know the history of King Maguire, then I solemnly recommend to you the book Bitter Bridge and Stone Bridge. It records in detail the Battle of Stone Bridge and the lives of King Maguire's 6 brides." After seeing Renly pull out a few books from his bookshelf, Grand Maester Pycelle stood up from behind the desk tremblingly and handed a book to the boy, as if intending to ease the relationship. After looking at the book in his hand, Renly took it without refusing. "Thank you, Maester Pycelle." He responded politely and seemed very polite, but the other party felt a little uncomfortable when he heard this. "I am a Grand Maester, Lord Renly. There is a difference between me and the Maester. You must know that I am more knowledgeable and wiser than ordinary Maesters." He was chattering endlessly, but the boy didn't listen to what he said at all. After a few brief responses of ah, he pushed the door open and walked out with a few books in his hands. This made the Grand Scholar couldn't help but shake his head, with a look of helplessness on his face. What a rude kid! The burned 7-pointed star grip is a very obvious symbol. The 7-pointed star represents the gods of the Church of the Seven Gods. In the history of Westeros, an organization called the Star Warriors used this pattern to be a sign. The Star Warriors, also known as the Poor People's Assembly, is one of the 2 major armed forces in the ancient Church of the Seven Gods. Another armed force is called the Knights of the Holy Sword, also known as the Sons of Warriors, which is mainly composed of church knights. These 2 armed organizations have a long history and have existed for a long time before the establishment of the Targaryen dynasty. However, decades after the Conqueror's War, they were actively disbanded by the Church. That was the result of the conflict with the Targaryen dynasty, but the result was clear, but the process was full of struggle. After discovering some characteristics, Renly felt that he had found a general goal. He looked for books, read them, and repeatedly learned about the history of a certain period. It wasn't until he finished lunch that he closed the book. After thinking about it, he felt that it was almost the same. So he first told himself to sleep and asked the servants not to disturb him at night, then locked the door of his bedroom from the inside, and finally lay down on the fluffy feather bed and sunk deep into it. After assuming a comfortable posture, the boy's hands on his stomach tightened the hard handle of the sword. A familiar sense of trance was born and quickly spread in my mind. Before his fuzzy thoughts had fully awakened, Renly felt instinctively uncomfortable with the burst of pain in his head, and his body was swaying extremely unstable, which subconsciously reminded him of the days when he was wandering on the sea. But after a while he was sure that he was not in the sea, but on land. Because he heard the bleating of the sheep. It wasn't just the sheep, there were also trivial conversations all around, and there seemed to be a lot of people there. At the same time, he could also smell the sour smell of sweat fermented on people's bodies, mixed with the smell of animal feces, rushing into his nostrils. He felt weak all over, as if he was having a high fever. He slowly opened his eyes and saw a clear sky with no clouds in sight. The view was wide. Renly found himself half lying and half leaning on a cart loaded with various goods. When he lowered his eyes, he could clearly see the muddy road behind the cart and a shepherd herding sheep. On both sides, there were some men, women, old and young, wearing loose cloth clothes following on foot. Their conversations were clear to the ears. As the cart continued to move forward, these people walking were gradually left behind. What the High Bishop said is of course correct. King Aenus arranged for his son and daughter to get married. Isn't he a monster? Didn't His Majesty Aegon marry his own sister? That's different. When the old king got married, the 7 kingdoms hadn't been unified yet. What does this have to do with this? It has a lot to do with it. Listening to the recent conversations, the information filled in them allowed Renly to basically determine the era he was in. The conversations of those farther away were not very nutritious. They were all about how good the weather was, what to eat later, and how long it would take us to get to King's Landing. Renly found that he had become a big man with long legs and blonde hair. The characteristics given by the bard profession also took effect at the moment, so the surrounding words were clearly audible, and the mutated special blood seemed to gradually glow in his body, which alleviated his weakness all over his body. All this was actually a bit incredible, but Renly didn't pay much attention to these things that he couldn't understand at all. At this time, he was staring at a piece of white cloud that quietly appeared in the sky. White clouds slowly emerged from nothing. The situation was quite strange, and the shape was completely different from normal clouds, as if a piece of white chalk outlined 3 lines of words on the surface of the blue sky. 3 lines of words that do not belong to this world. Awarded as a knight. Participated in the church's trial of the 7 sons of Magurai in the name of a warrior's son and won. Guide the sons of chaos to the right path. Chapter 77. The clouds in the sky gathered and formed, and then disappeared again after Renly took a few glances. However, before he could think about it carefully, an old voice suddenly asked in his ear. Lemon, are you feeling better? You look better than yesterday. Looking sideways, he saw a hunched-over white-haired old man sitting on the side of the bullock cart. Now this man turned his head and looked at him with concern. Lemon? It is generally popular among common people to name their children after various plants and fruits, such as lemon, tansy, turnip, castor, beans, and so on. Are you a civilian now? Renly understood secretly, but did not speak, but nodded. Seeing this, the other party smiled, revealing a set of teeth that were reddened from chewing some kind of beetle nut-like plant for many years. Then you have a good rest, and I will call you when you stop. The old man said, patting Renly on the forehead. His expression seemed to be quite close. Renly nodded again, then pretended to be tired and closed his eyes to rest. But in fact, he was constantly listening to the various conversations around him at this time. In conjunction with the strange cloud formation he had just seen, he gradually gained some insights in his heart. In the 37th year of the conquest calendar, Aegon the Conqueror died of a stroke on Dragonstone at the age of 64. He was succeeded by his eldest son Aenus. King Aenus was weak and incompetent. During his short reign, chaos arose throughout the 7 kingdoms. The most serious one was the conflict with the church. The Targaryen family has intermarried within the family for generations, but this seriously conflicts with the church's teachings prohibiting incest. When Aegon the Conqueror was alive, the church acquiesced in this matter, and even more acquiesced in his polygamy, but after his death, this contradiction immediately surfaced in the face of an incompetent king. The first conflict broke out when King Aenus' brother, Maegor Targaryen, married a second wife and committed bigamy. Although the result of this incident was that King Aenus' brother Maegor took his second wife and fled to the free trade city. But the church is obviously not satisfied with this. This also leaves hidden dangers for a second, more intense conflict to break out. In the 41st year of the conquest calendar, King Aenus arranged for his daughter to marry his heir in accordance with family tradition. Therefore, the starry cathedral of Old Town, where the Archbishop of the Church of the 7 Gods was based at that time, issued a stern statement excommunicating the king from the church, and the general calling him a monster king. The people responded one after another, and countless hostile eyes were aimed at the Targaryen who originally ruled them. The church at that time not only had 2 major armed forces, the Assembly of the Poor and the Sons of Warriors, but also had autonomous judicial powers. After the statement from the Temple of Stars, the warrior sons began to strengthen the defense of the Temple of Thought located at the top of Rhenus Hills in King's Landing, and summoned people from all over to come for reinforcements, preparing to use it as a stronghold to fight against the Royal Red Keep on Aegon's high hills. Some crazy members of the Poor People's Assembly even climbed up the walls of the Red Fort, which was not yet fully completed, and sneaked into the Red Fort to prepare to assassinate the king. Although they failed, they frightened the weak king so much that he and the royal family fled back to Dragonstone, the home of the Targaryen family. As a result, King's Landing was completely occupied by the church. King Aenus died of illness not long after returning to Dragonstone. Although he had his own son, it was not his heir who ascended the throne, but his brother Maegor. Magur's mother was Queen Visenya, the conqueror's high queen who challenged all those who denied Magur's rule after her son's coronation at Dragonstone. The leader of the church warrior sons accepted the challenge, but on condition that the more ancient and cruel Seven Sons trial be launched. King Magur responded. This is roughly the series of events facing the current era. Renly found that the people around him were talking about the statement issued by the Archbishop of the Starry Cathedral. It was obvious that this freshness had not passed. Coupled with other overheard words, he was finally able to confirm that their group was being called to march towards King's Landing. Hurry and go to defend the Temple of Remembrance at the top of the hills of Rennes, King's Landing, and confront King Aeneas who has not yet escaped. This route does not conflict with the three things he saw before. Become a knight. Participated in the church's trial of 7 sons of Magur I in the name of the warrior's son and 1. Guide the sons of chaos to the right path. Renly felt that each of these things was getting harder and harder. Being made a knight is not too difficult for him, because the tradition of Westeros is that a knight can make others a knight. If he follows the literal meaning, he can definitely get a lot of money. Then bribe some poor knight to canonize him. Although this kind of canonization is extremely dishonorable and irregular, and there is a risk of being suspected of fraud, it is nominally considered to have obtained the status of a knight. However, if you consider the second thing, it would be impossible for Renly to fool around like this. The Poor People's Assembly and the Soldiers' Sons are the two major armed forces of the Church. However, compared to the Poor People's Assembly, which can be joined by anyone, the Warriors' Sons, which only accepts knights, needs to be strictly screened. People who do not have the skills of various knights can even think of joining. As for Renly, he has never been trained as a knight at all, let alone that he not only wants to join the Warrior Sons, but also defeat the 7 Sons trial. The rules of the 7 Sons trial are similar to those of ordinary one-on-one combat trials, except that the number is 7 versus 7. Unless the person involved withdraws the accusation or the person being judged dies, the 7 Sons trial cannot be stopped, which means that both parties will either die or live. That's fine. Even if facing ordinary enemies, it's not impossible to say that there is no chance of winning. However, this trial is a confrontation between the long-standing church in Westeros and the new secular dynasty. The participants cannot be mediocre people. They will only be top masters carefully selected by both forces. A rookie who has not yet become a knight, going against the top knights on the continent? Renly didn't think he could win in a head-on fight, and he didn't even have a clue how to get into the trial. In addition, the third task also made him very confused. Whether it was recorded in history books or in his memories, the term Sons of Chaos had never appeared. Who or what was this thing? And how to guide it? Countless questions made him feel very powerless for a while, but in general, Renly did not lose confidence because of this. After all, this was just a copy. He would try his best according to the situation. If he couldn't complete these tasks, he would die. So he didn't think about it anymore, and his eyes swept around, and finally looked at the old figure in a rainbow cloak who was leading the way at the front of the team. The team heading towards King's Landing here is a mixture of ordinary civilians and members of the Poor's Gathering, and a group of militia of the Poor's Gathering is usually led by a warrior's son. The rainbow cloak on the other party proves that he is a warrior's son, so he must be the leader of this group of militia, or this team, and Renly cannot ignore him. Because no matter what means are used to win in the end, joining the Knights of the Warrior's Son is the most basic requirement. Chapter 78. The team they were in was originally less than 100 people, and they were all members of the Poor People's Assembly. They gathered and set off near a castle called Acorn Hall in the Riverlands. However, the job of the members of the Poor People's Assembly was to protect believers from harm on the road, and they kept encountering some travelers going to the King's Landing Temple to worship, so the team gradually expanded to more than 200 people. The addition of these people seriously affected the team's forward speed and made the entire team chaotic, but it also brought some conveniences. For example, the rickety bullock cart beneath me was not actually the property of a member of the Poor People's Assembly, but was provided by an old man who joined in midway. The old man was called Walter, and the young man driving the ox cart was his son. They are not actually acquaintances with the lemon possessed by Renly, and they even met not long ago. It's just that the old man is kind-hearted and takes good care of the sick lemon, even letting him get in the car. At the same time, he is also very polite to others around him, even a little weak. Monks often say that we are born guilty. One time during a casual chat, the old man sighed, "Fortunately, the gods gave us hands and feet, which can be used to atone for our sins. Honor the great gods, old Walter." The middle-aged sheep herder, who was always hanging behind the ox cart, laughed at him after hearing this. So help me, I have an urgent need to urinate. Please help us take care of these bleeding little guys. So the old man happily got off the ox cart and went to help, but he didn't see the sheep herder who was in urgent need of urination return for a long time. Renly glanced around and saw that the man had already gone to the front of the line to chat and spank with another guy dressed as a sheep herder. In fact, this was the third time after Renly became possessed that he asked the old man to help take care of the sheep and went off to the side to be lazy. Many people in the worship team are pious, but not all of them are good people. I learned from the hunchbacked old man next to me that he was already suffering from a high fever when the team picked up the lemon from the roadside. Renly was sure that no one around him knew him. This also explains why he was lying alone on the bullock cart, but no one came to visit him. Apart from chatting with old Walter for a long time and making sarcastic remarks, Renly was naturally most concerned about the son of the warrior who led the team, but he had no chance to come into contact with him. Firstly, he was still very weak and could not leave the cart. Secondly, he rarely came to the back of the team where the cart was. According to Renly's observations in the past 2 days, every time he camped, the warrior's son knight would sit alone by the campfire and pray silently. Occasionally he would stay with the 3 core members of the Poor People's Assembly, but the distance was too far and he didn't know them. Talking about something. There are many people in the team, and everyone is included. Apart from the members of the Poor Assembly holding simple weapons, you can often see the figures of shepherds, farmers, traders, beggars, and women running around with a few naked children behind them. This made the surrounding environment chaotic, but it allowed Renly, who had a keen hearing, to learn some useful information. Coupled with the intentional or unintentional guidance when chatting with people, he still knew a lot of things. For example, the knight is named Lelyn. He joined the Sons of Warriors when he was more than 10 years old. He has been a veteran knight for more than 40 years. For example, the Knights of Lelyn travel back and forth on the route between Acorn Hall and King's Landing all year round to protect travelers. For example, he was originally from the western region and was a noble, but he only joined the church after his family suffered a disaster. This information made Renly thoughtful, and while the other party was on a horse tour, Renly saw the heraldic patterns painted on the black robe and shield outside his armor. It was a crystal sword with tears flowing through it. The 7-colored crystal sword shining on a black background is the inherent emblem of the Knights of the Warrior's Sons, but crying is something only Renly can see. He had some ideas, but he didn't take action immediately. Instead, he stayed in the bullock cart to recuperate, preparing to wait until he regained his ability to move. It seems that every time he enters this kind of dungeon, he will possess the target facing various dangerous situations, making Renly always feel passive. However, since possessing him, his weakness has gradually diminished. It seems that the mutated Valyrian blood naturally has some resistance to diseases. Even on the 3rd day after possession, he had basically recovered his mobility. Why do we have to walk in the fields when we can just ride in a bullock cart? So he just pretended that he was still ill, and others didn't pay much attention to him. While walking swayingly, I would occasionally chat with Walter or his son, and I would also think about how to complete those 3 things. At the same time, although the changes after eating the dragon egg made him frightened, the effect caused Renly to think about whether he should get a new dragon egg in this era, or something else. According to historical records, during the late reign of Aegon the Conqueror, 12 young dragons were hatched on Dragonstone. The road beneath me is located in a green fertile field, with wild flowers and grass growing on both sides. Behind it are more than a dozen dirty sheep, driven by the sheep herders' whips, bleeding and stepping on the rather hard soil surface in the sun. On the bed, black excrement is left every now and then. On the right side of the fertile plain, the overlapping high mountains are vaguely visible, slowly retreating as the ox cart moves forward. Not far to the left, there is a river flowing rapidly. The river is called the Blackwater River. It spreads from the Riverlands to King's Landing, and finally flows into the sea across King's Landing. It is one of the main rivers in Westeros. So the sound of the river flowing, the sound of sheep, the footsteps and discussions of people are always heard. The fishy smell of the sheep and the stench of the old yellow cow pulling the ox cart are particularly unique. Renly hoped that his illness was a cold, the kind that would cause nasal congestion, but unfortunately it was not. At this time, he was possessed by a big blonde and blue-eyed man with a broad chest and straight long legs. When he stood up, he seemed to be able to overlook everything around him. At least 1.9 meters tall. Such a tall man, apart from anything else, would have a great advantage in physique alone when wearing knight armor. It was useless to think about dragon eggs now. Renly planned to wait until he arrived at King's Landing. For now, he was more concerned about how he could become a knight, or a knight under the command of a warrior's son. His initial idea was to try to contact the warrior's son who led the team after he recovered completely, and then start from him. However, this decision did not last long. An interesting sign in the team attracted Renly's attention. "Help me, old Walter, we are going to pick some wild nettles over there to make a cup of tea. Help me take care of these lambs, and we will share some tea with you when we come back." The sloppy shepherd with a rag hat and pockmarks on his face came to the door again after peeing. After seeing that the old man had no objection, he patted him on the shoulder and turned away with a smile. This was the nth time he had been absent-minded. Looking at the shepherd's back, Renly touched his chin, then looked up at the man driving the ox cart, the son of the old man Walter. "Tommy, do you know this shepherd? He was added on the way, I don't know him." The young man with messy red hair answered, his grey face full of dissatisfaction. Obviously, he had long been impatient with his pious old father being constantly ordered around. "Do you know who knows him?" Renly asked again. "Except for the shepherd who always hangs out with him, I don't see anyone else who knows him. They always chat together, why don't they mix the two flocks of sheep together?" "Because they are afraid that they can't tell which one belongs to which one." The young man driving the ox cart said contemptuously, "Look at his rogue look. If the two flocks of sheep are mixed together and then separated later, all the fat sheep will definitely run into his hands. Someone in our village has done this." Renly nodded when he heard this. This sounds quite reasonable, but shouldn't a normal farmer be tight with his own property? How can he be so confident to hand over those sheep to others? And then he always runs to the side to chat with others? Even if Walter is honest and reassuring. Thinking of the background of the current era, a trace of suspicion flashed in his eyes, so Renly paid special attention to the sloppy shepherd who looked slick in the next 2 days, and found that every time he made excuses to get rid of the sheep, he was just communicating with another shepherd. This doesn't seem to be anything special. After all, everyone has a fixed small circle, and it is impossible to know everyone in the team. It is normal to chat with acquaintances in their respective villages while on the road and not take the initiative to contact strangers around. But Renly always felt that the shepherd was very suspicious. This suspicion reached its peak when he pretended to pee and approached, and then overheard something. They were discussing whether to slip away first. Chapter 79. What should you do if you overhear something obviously inappropriate? You can choose to continue to wait and see and eavesdrop on more information, or you can choose to sneak away and report. But after shaking his back, Renly put on his trousers and walked straight towards the two shepherds standing by the river not far away. His behavior was undisguised, and the two shepherds were obviously wary of this. They changed the topic to the issue of buying and selling each other's sheep. However, they obviously couldn't imagine how good Renly's ears were. This behavior not only failed to cover up anything, but made them more obvious. "Lemon, are you healed?" When Renly came close to a certain distance, the familiar sloppy sheep herder pretended to notice him and asked him with a smile. "That's right, I'm full of strength now," Renly replied. After walking to the side of the sheep herder, he suddenly raised his leg and kicked hard without any warning. The other party was caught off guard and let out a scream. Then he hunched over and covered his lower body. But then he was hit on the back of the head by a huge fist, and he fell to the ground with a loud bang. "You have been exposed," Renly yelled while smashing. The other shepherd was stunned for a moment during the process, and then his expression changed drastically after hearing the words. Then without hesitation, he turned around and ran towards the flowing Blackwater River a few steps away and jumped into it. The sound of splashing into the water shocked the people who had gathered around because of the former shepherd's screams, but at this moment Renly shouted loudly. "Don't let him get away, they are traitors." While shouting, he picked up a pebble on the dusty ground, and then threw it hard at the fugitive who was half a man high in the river and fluttering towards the other side of the river. The distance was not far, and he had experience with this. He saw the grey oval stone draw a straight parabola in mid-air, and then hit the opponent's head above the water with a crash. The sheep herder, who was struggling to swim forward, shuddered and was immediately swallowed by the surging river. This series of things happened very quickly. By the time the people around them reacted, the two shepherds had already been killed. Renly wanted to go up and drag the drowned sheepherd out, but he was blocked by two young men armed with clubs. "Big Lemon? Why are you crazy?" One of them stared at him warily and asked. There are several people named Lemon in the team, so in order to distinguish them, we can only add nicknames. As members of the Poor People's Assembly, although they were not familiar with the big blonde man, they also knew his name. They are traitors. Renly replied. He glanced around and found that the river bank was surrounded by nearby crowds. Those at the front of the team also paid their attention, so he added. I heard their conversation and they were traitors. At this time, he didn't need to do anything more. Someone had already rushed into the river to drag out the sheep herder who had been knocked unconscious. The sound of horse hooves was approaching quickly, and he saw the leading knight Lelyn wearing a rainbow cape trotting all the way. Ran over. The onlookers made way for him, and the man finally arrived in front of Renly, looked down at him and asked, You say, they are traitors? The knight sitting astride the horse was wearing silver-plated armor, with grey hair and black eyes. He was tall, but his voice sounded very old, and his thin face was also full of wrinkles. He looked to be in his 50s. Yes, they are traitors. As Renly spoke, he lightly kicked the sheep herder beneath him who had been knocked unconscious by him, causing him to groan unconsciously. We are discussing running away. These words caused a commotion among the surrounding crowd. These mixed teams of farmers, craftsmen, and assembly members seemed to have never thought that such a thing would happen, and even their expressions did not quite believe it. It's just that a discerning person can see that something is definitely not normal when they look at the current situation. If there were no ghosts, why would the other shepherd jump into the river to escape? The old knight then dismounted from his horse, squatted down and began to search the unconscious sheep herder in front of Renly, and also began to carefully examine his appearance. Then he found a dagger and some odds and ends that should not belong to the shepherd. This situation made the experienced old knight look grim, but he didn't say anything more. Instead, he stood up and shouted to the group of people gathered behind him, It's 2 thieves, everyone should disperse. Upon hearing that it was a thief, the onlookers immediately lost interest, leaving only Knight Laren and 3 core members of the Poor People's Assembly. I want to thank you, Lemon. Your name is Lemon, right? The old knight then asked. When the other party nodded, he said, This may affect the next trip. I hope you can keep it secret for us. Renly nodded again when he heard this, and then suddenly asked, Will there be a battle? Perhaps, answered the old knight. I want to participate too. A bearded man behind the knight smiled and said, The Star Warriors welcome all devout believers to join, Big Lemon. He looked very enthusiastic, but unfortunately Renly's goal was not to join the poor people's gathering, so he shook his head and said, I want to join the warriors' sons. These words were very straightforward, causing the 3 of them to burst into laughter. The old knight at the head also shook his head helplessly, thinking that this man lacked common sense, so he gave a kind reminder. Only knights can join the warrior sons, Lemon. This is the church's rule. You can't join just because you want to. Renly heard this and immediately said, I can become a knight. You can't be a knight just because you want to, kid. The bearded man replied. However, this was exactly what Renly wanted. His purpose was not to find a traitor, but to attract the attention of the old knight. Now that he had done this, he also brought the topic to what he wanted. So he answered blankly, My grandfather was a knight, why can't I be a knight? This made the 3 members of the poor gathering laugh again. Knights are not inherited. Another tall and thin man smiled and said, If we can inherit, we can become a knight now. Most young people dream of becoming a knight when they are young, and they always have a kind of extravagant hope to become a knight, so Renly's current behavior is actually very normal, just lacking common sense. The old knight was a little interested when he heard this. You said your grandfather was a knight? He asked, What's his name? Renly was relieved when he saw this, and on the surface he immediately answered a name that he had thought about for a long time. His name is Pawen Osgri. After the words fell, the old knight opposite was stunned. Chapter 80. After Renly finished speaking, there was a moment of silence, and then the old knight asked. Pawen Osgri, are you sure? His facial expression was very strange, and Renly was a little confused. There were many people named Pawen in history, but the Pawen Osgri he was talking about was not a person too far away, but the heir of a lord family in the River Reach during the Conqueror War era that he had read in historical materials. He died at a young age in a battle called the Raging Fire. Due to his certain speculation about the old knight in front of him, he pondered for a long time before figuring out this name. It was originally just a layer of tiger skin, but judging from the situation, could this person know the person he was talking about? This is possible. In his time, the surname Osgry belonged to a small noble family in the River Reach, but now it is one of the most famous nobles in the River Reach. It seems understandable that this old knight from the west knows the person he is talking about. After all, the west is adjacent to the River Reach. That's the name. Thinking in his heart did not affect Renly's superficial answer. He touched his forehead and said hesitantly, Perwyn Osgry, I remember this name, sir, my father told me personally. What's your father's name? The old knight asked again after hearing this. His name is Jerry Flowers, sir. Renly replied. The surname Flowers is one of the many surnames of illegitimate children in Westeros. In Westeros, illegitimate children of nobles from all over the Seven Kingdoms have no right to inherit their father's surname, but they are not without surnames. Each region in the Seven Kingdoms has a corresponding illegitimate surname, such as Flowers in the River Bay, Snow in the North, Storm in the Stormland, and so on. Renly felt that the old knight might be familiar with the Osgry family, but this did not affect him from saying the identity he had set for himself. After all, you may be familiar with the person involved, but you can't be familiar with the illegitimate child of the person involved, right? And this illegitimate child was made up by him casually. As expected, the other party did not ask any more questions after hearing this, but frowned and pondered, as if recalling something. Renly felt that things were a bit bad. He had no other intention in mentioning this name, just to bring the two sides closer while bringing them closer. This approach was very skillful. Before the Conqueror War, the Osgry family was a great noble in the Reach, with a great reputation, and was quite rich and powerful. However, after the raging battle in which Aegon conquered the Reach and the West, the Osgry family suffered heavy losses, and from then on began to go downhill, and later suffered setbacks. By his time, it was even just a family of wealthy knights. This alone was just a history of the rise and fall of a noble family, but considering the origin of the old knight in front of him, it might not be that simple. According to his inquiries, the old knight in front of him was born into a noble family in the West, but 41 years ago he suddenly gave up his family's property and inheritance rights and chose to join the church. What kind of blow could make him suddenly give up his property in the West and run to the church to become a poor and simple church knight? There are many possibilities: family infighting, being trapped by love, or even maybe this person suddenly came to his senses and thought that faith is more important than material wealth. But if we consider the time and what happened in the Westerly at that time, Renly had to think of a possibility. Did this person in front of him participate in that raging battle, or did his father and brothers participate? As a result, he was hit hard after the death of his relatives and finally converted to the church? This possibility is not small, because the River Reach and the Westerly were both victims of the raging battle, and suffered heavy casualties from the dragon's burn. Renly cannot be completely sure of this, but if this is true, what would an old man whose life was changed by that battle think when facing the descendants of the nobles whose entire family's fate was also changed by that battle? Although one is a Westerly noble and the other is a River Reach noble, the two sides were brothers in distress in that battle. So, no matter how indifferent one's temperament is, it is impossible to be indifferent to the downtrodden descendants of his comrade in distress, right? Of course, if you want to disguise this, you must have a certain historical background. At least you have to know the coat of arms and family history of your family. You don't need to know too much, but you can't know nothing at all. Otherwise, there will be many mistakes and people will only regard you as a liar. At the same time, you can't find nobles who are too close to you. If you are too close, you will be easily exposed. You can't claim that you are a direct descendant of the family, otherwise how could you be so miserable? Renly knew that the fate of the Osgry family was changed because of the rage, but he didn't know the specific situation of that family in the current era. So Renly positioned himself as a bastard, or the son of a bastard, who is not well known, has fallen to the civilian class, but still remembers his origin as a bastard. It is not difficult to disguise this. After all, a commoner who lives in a village and does not know most of the people except his own lord can pull out many things between the nobles, which proves that his identity is not simple, and Renly can read, which can better show his identity. As a result, he became the son of a poor bastard from a noble family in the Reach that was ruined by the Battle of the Field of Fury. Although his status is also low, he is much better than ordinary farmers. In addition, the other party may have emotions because they are also fellow sufferers, so I think his status will be completely different from before. As long as this status is improved, Renly can more easily achieve his goal. Try to learn knight-related knowledge and skills from him, and rely on his identity to successfully become a knight and finally join the Sons of Warriors. Only by becoming a knight, or a knight who looks like a knight, can he join the Sons of Warriors, and only by joining the Sons of Warriors can he participate in the future trial of the Seven Sons. This is a serial task. Renly has prepared for the first step of the long journey, and the starting point is the knight Laren in front of him. It's just that this first step has just been taken, and it seems that something went wrong. Obviously, the old knight couldn't have imagined that the big blonde man with thick eyebrows and big eyes in front of him would have so much thoughts in his simple words, but it was indeed as Renly worried that he was very familiar with Perwyn Osgry mentioned by Renly, and even more familiar than he could be. That is why the old knight carefully pondered the hidden message behind Renly's words, instead of being aroused by sympathy or indifference as Renly expected. But he thought for a long time and couldn't seem to figure out anything, so under Renly's anxious gaze, he raised his deep and dark eyes and carefully examined Renly's face, and finally patted his shoulder and sighed, and ordered his subordinates to take the two sheep herders who had initially woken up and turned away. This made Renly feel a little puzzled, and he had a bad premonition, which came true not long after. After setting up camp that night, the old knight suddenly came to the door, and after looking at him carefully for a long time, he said, "My name is not Laren, my real name is Weiss Osgry." Renly was stunned when he heard this, and the other party said, "The Perwyn Osgry you are talking about is my brother."